Today is March 11th, 2013, and we are interviewing Jack Michael at the Illinois State Library. Mr. Michael was born October 18th, 1924. My name is Cheryl Walker, and I'll be interviewing Mr. Michael. Mr. Michael, could you state for the record what war and branch of service you served in?
I was in the Army. I took a medical basic at Camp Grant. From Camp Grant went to Camp Ellis, and there they formed the 95th Medical Gas Treatment Battalion. And in there I had a job working in headquarters supply. We had 55 men and 9 officers. And they had me listed as supply clerk. And went that away until we got over in Europe. We got in England and we got ready to go across over into France. Why, they changed the TO and they cut down on some of the manpower and they done away with different jobs. And they moved me from supply to the motor pool, driving a truck. I drove a 3/4 ton Dodge weapons carrier for supply. And then I done that all the way through, and then when I was, well, where else we go?
Where did you were drafted, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you remember getting your draft notice?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
How old were you?
Well, I was about 17, I think. But anyway, back through the years, I always wanted a horse before I wanted a car. I was raised with a lot of, and my dad was busy, and I was helping him. And in the meantime, before that, I was working at a shoe factory. Oh, I don't know, making a little bit of money and not no great big amount, but knowing I was going to be drafted for long. But I bought a cow. My dad said, that cow makes some money. And my mom said, well, why don't you go buy her? And I said, well, where would I get it? She said, you go talk to the banker, and he'll probably loan you the money. And my dad said, yeah, I'll sign the note. So I went and talked to the banker, and as long as you was trying, he'd help you. So he said, yeah. I said, you go ahead and have your dad write a check for the cow. And he said, tell me what it is, and when it comes in, I'll take care of it. Well, he done that. And maybe a week or two afterwards, well, he caught me one day at the service station. Oh, he said, hey, you reckon we better sign these papers? And I said, well, I guess. So he had a chattel mortgage made out, and I signed it. And he said, I'll catch your dad later on. Okay. Well, I worked, and then I worked at a stone quarry where they done printed everything by hand. 20 cents an hour. And saved a little money. Finally paid this cow off. And the mortgage, when I paid it off, banker said, you don't want to buy another cow? And I, no. I want to buy some clothes, stuff for myself, and kind of help the family a little bit. Well, taxes come due on the place. We needed tires for the pickup. Dad didn't have the money, but I did. So I paid the taxes, bought a pair of front tires for the car, or for the truck. They took 616s, and they was pretty popular tire. You could get a permit from the ration board, but you couldn't buy the tire because it wasn't available. So I bought, I think, 19-inch Model A tires. And the wheels would fit, and I put them on the front of the truck. That's what we had for the truck. Well, then my dad told me, he said, well, you know, as soon as we kind of get, I'll buy you a horse for what you spent and everything. and I worked right alongside of him. When I got out of grade school, I never went to high school because I stayed right and helped him. And at that time, everything we hauled, we scooped it on, scooped it off, everything by hand. And so anyway, he found me a horse, and I took it home. And then I had an uncle that lived up here at Dawson, and he told me, he said, Jack, if you get your horse, you come up. I got a big Western breaking saddle and a bridle that has been braided by horsehair. Indians done it, and at one time belonged to Buffalo Bill. And he said, I want to give you that. You come up. Well, that was the big thing. I was going to get this horse. But before I went up there, why, my dad said, we really ought to put some shoes on your horse. So we bought some shoes. Of course, you just buy them in the rough, and he'd take them to the blacksmith. And the blacksmith said, well, I'll fit the shoes, but I won't nail them on. He said, I'm getting too old to nail them on. He said, but he fit the shoes. So my dad and another guy, they put the shoes on. Well, the day I went and got that done and come back, that's the day I picked up my notice 2 weeks to go to the draft board. Or the draft board had sent 2 weeks. I went to Chicago. Well, I went to a local doctor first and took a little examination. Then I went to Chicago, and that's where I was inducted up there, and examination up there. And I always said I was going to the Navy. I said, I'm going to the Navy. Went up there and I went through all that rigmarole and everything. And when I got down to last, some lady sat behind the table and she looked up at me and had my papers writing on them. She said, you want the Army or Navy? And I said, Army. I wasn't going to back down. And so that's what she wrote. When I come home, I told the folks, they said, we thought you was going to the Navy if you had a choice. I said, well, I thought I was too. But I said, some way it just told me to go with the Army. Well, I learned right away in the Army, you don't volunteer for too much. You just take it as it comes. In the first few weeks of basic, I tell you, I was so disgusted. I'd never been away from home a whole lot. And throwed all them clothes out there and all that stuff. You need all this, you need all that. And I was so disgusted. It was up at Camp Grant. And if they'd have told me, Jack, you lay your leg out there and we'll cut it off right here, you can take the rest of it and go home, I'd have stuck her out there. Then all at once, I realized, hey, I can do anything these other guys can do. Because we was took a medical basic, which was basically at that time was a lot of first aid and safety. Didn't get into a lot of deep details, but first aid and safety. And our first hike was 2.5 miles. We lost half the company. There was a lot of guys from the city, from Chicago east, everything east of the Mississippi almost. So I don't think we had over a half a dozen. Well, that come later. That was from on this other west side of Mississippi. And them guys, their feet was sore, and they couldn't wear the heavy shoes. Didn't bother me. I could wear them shoes. And the thing that bothered me more than anything else, they gave us 3 sets of underclothes. Shorts, T-shirts, so on. But you had to save 1 set for inspection. Laundry, it took a week to turn the laundry around. And I had 3 pair. Well, I didn't know what I was going to do. Well, I wrote to my dad and told him, I got to have some money. Because they told you, oh, you don't need money, we'll furnish all this, well, that. And I knowed he didn't have a lot of money. But he went out on a farm and had some walnut trees, cut them walnut trees down, sold them walnut logs. I think, if my memory served me right, he sent me about $15. Well, at that time, it was enough for me to buy some extra underclothes and extra stuff I needed for my inspection box. I kept them right there just especially for that. And of course, I made do with the others. And if the laundry didn't get back, well, I just wore the other pair a little bit longer till it got back. But we went through 13 weeks of basic in Grant, and a lot of first aid and safety, and we took various hikes at different times. And our last hike was 32 miles. We never lost them. Well, we lost one man, but we said, he's old. He was 40. We were kids. We were kids with full pack and everything. The night before, they didn't tell us when we was going to take this big hike, but that was right at the end of our basic and everything, our book learning and all that other stuff and so on. And I had different assignments as we'd go out on bivouac and stuff with medical corps. I know one time I was out and they assigned me as a sanitary technician. Well, that boiled down to all I had to do was go see that the train was built right, and that was when you're out in the woods like that, you just build a pit. Everybody dumps in there, and then the garbage from the kitchen, well, there's a big pit built there, and you dump that in there, and then, of course, when you finish, you have to cover it. And that was my job as a sanitary technician, to see that that was done. Well, I didn't have to do it, but and while I was there, one of our officers, I met him, and we talked. Of course, I had my credentials on, I was a sanitary technician. And after that, it wasn't a week that was in class one day, and he was asking questions. And when they ask a question, you better know what they ask. You may not have to know the answer, but you better know what they ask. You don't get up and say, would you repeat that, sir? Because if you do, they would chew on you like you wouldn't believe. And so I was sitting there, and when he called my name, I stood up, and I drawed a blank. I couldn't tell for sure what he asked. But he looked at me, and he said, that's okay, Mike, just go ahead and sit down. He said, I know you're already a technician. He said, you already know what the answer is. Saved by the bell. But anyway, we went through this, and before we went out, we went to one of the big buildings up there, and we had a kind of a farewell party. We had one guy that, well, they call him the Duck. His clothes just hung on him, and when he walked, and his neck went like this, and and very rugged looking. But his bed was neat, and so on. And so the guys asked him one day, Kippy was his name, said, what did you do, Kippy, in civilian life? Well, he said, I played a set of drums. And I said, you couldn't play drums, But that night of our farewell party, or I guess we called it, we had some chips and stuff for snacks, and some soda and 3-2 beer, and and they brought in a little string band, a guitar and a banjo and a set of drums, and I don't know what else. There's only 3 pieces, I remember that. And some of the guys said, hey. So they got a hold of the first sergeant and said, Sergeant, Kipke says he played drums in civilian life. Can we get him up there? Yeah, he said, we can get him up there. And they took him up there and set him there. And I'll swear, when he picked up them sticks, he made a riffle over them drums. It's almost like notes. He could play that sucker, and boy, the more he played, the more the 3-2 beer the guys brought to him, the sweat pouring off of him. I don't know, we stayed till probably 10:30 that night, closed up, went home. Next morning at 3 o'clock, they squalled us out of bed. full packing on, give us an hour from the time it woke us up to fall in line, and we had to go to the mess hall and get a light breakfast, which was a drink and a little bit of, I don't know, donuts or sweets or something. And we fell out on the road, and we took off. And I happened to be on point guard, which they had so many up here, and when they come to a crossing, you stopped off here, and the other guy stopped off here, and then the column all went through. Everybody went through. Then you fell in behind, and you made your way on up to back up there by the time they needed you again. They had some other guys up there maybe take the others, but time they got 2 or 3 sections, why you needed to be back up. So you took your full pack and everything, went and hurried back up there and I was on that. We went till about 8 o'clock, and we went into a forest, and we stopped, and they said, well, we got an hour's break here, you're going to have breakfast. And they told us to keep 1 pair of socks out. There, they told us then, take your shoes off, air your feet, change socks, put your shoes back on, get your breakfast, get ready to fall out in an hour's time. We did and took off again. We come in at 11:30, and we had covered 32 miles. They said the officer leading the pack got kind of lost, and he made a wrong turn and took the road a little further than what he was supposed to. But after he had turned, he couldn't turn around and bring them back, so he had to go on. So we come back. We got it about 11:30, and they said, okay, break till 12 o'clock, have chow. Back on the parade ground at 2 in the afternoon. So we fell out for 2. They said, now we're going to the parade ground and we're going to play this afternoon. We're not going to do anything but baseball, softball, tug of war, whatever it is we can play, we're going to play. We're going to go do that. Now, if there's anybody that's not able to play, they're too sore or too hurt too bad, fall out. You won't have to go play. So there's about 4 or 5 fell out. Rest of us, we went to the parade ground and we played. Just like we hiked. We were supposed to hike for 45 minutes, then rest 15, first hour. The second hour, we'd go 50 minutes and rest 10. Well, we done the same thing in playing. And we come back in at, I don't know, 4:30 that evening, Saturday evening. Them 6 guys fell out, they took them down and they scrubbed that hall where we'd had a party before. So I learned pretty quick, you don't volunteer, you don't just keep calm. And there wasn't a man that wasn't able to go to town that night. We was tough as nails, I tell you. When I went in, I weighed 140 pounds. Stood about 5'5", 5'6", along there someplace. But I'd made up my mind after saying, well, I can do anything these other guys can do. I didn't have the education. I only had an 8th grade education. But if they gave me enough blackboard and enough chalk, I could solve any problem I had by just running up there and running out, you know. And I done pretty good. The last year or so in school, my dad had rented a farm, and I helped him. We had 2 teams, and we plowed everything with walking plows. He would plow a complete round while I was going just plumb through with the pair that I had. And I was learning. And so I would go early and plow till school time, and then I'd run to school about not quite a half a mile. He'd take his team and he'd plow till they was getting tired, and then he'd let them rest and he'd go get my team. And he took care of my horses and he had them back out there when school was over at 4 o'clock. Then I'd go meet him, and then we'd plow till dark. And we done that one year. My dad said, you gotta rent the farm that year. But he said, if this works good, he said, we're going to lease it for another 15. Well, that would have took the war and everything else, but in the meantime, it belonged to 2 old maid sisters, and one of them passed away and threw it into a estate. They sold it. Well, he didn't have the money to buy it, so we had to move out. Moved to another area. Then there was a lot smaller land and so on, but I done the farming, and my dad worked out by wherever he could to make $1 or so on. And $1 a day was a pretty good wage. At least she's getting something. But then when I went on in the service then, why, my base pay I think was $51 or $2, I think, to start with. When I got private first class, I think I got 54 or 55. But after they took my insurance out, and then when I went in, they told me, they said, you got to buy a war bond. You got to take so much money and buy a bond. So I was signed up to buy, so ever so often got a $25 bond. And I think I was getting about $19. No, I was getting $22 or $24 a month after everything was taken out. Was okay. We was in Camp Syward, Alabama. We come home. We got 15 days leave before World War C. The wife and I, Marie and I, got married. The 4th day of April in 44. 4th and 14th of 44. She stayed home. Of course, I went on to serve. Took out a little bit of my money and made her allotment. And I think I drawed $19 a month then after that. But she took hers, all she got, and she lived in the country of 4 miles from town. But every day that check comes, she'd walk to town, put that in the bank, walk back. When I come home from service, that's what we had to start with. That, my muster and outpay. It all ended up to about $2,000. At that time, that was a lot of money. Or we thought it was, anyway. So, and when I got discharged, why, one thing led to another, and she wanted to leave. She didn't like to stay down in that part of the country. She wanted to be away. And of course, I promised her one time, probably when I was wanting something, I said, well, we'll do that someday. Well, we'll move. Well, went on, and I couldn't find a job, couldn't get a job. So I went out and bought an old truck, a used truck, and started for myself back where I'd left off helping my dad. And done that for about 5 years, and that length of time, why, spent what much money we had, and we was in debt about that much, and I got a chance to go to work at a rock quarry as a truck driver. My brother was there help running the scales, and I had a guy, we was hauling wood for this guy, and we went at the restaurant to have lunch, and while we were sitting there, well, they said, you wanted on the phone, so I went to the phone with my brother. He said, you want a job up here at the quarry? And I said, well, yes, I'd like to have a job. He said, come up here today. He said, they're wanting to start today. Okay, so I went and told this guy, I said, sorry, but I'm taking off. So I went up and spent the time with them. They stayed there that fall, and that was 1950, I think it was. Spent some time there, and then they went on to, moved up by Shelbyville, south of Shelbyville. And they asked me, said, you want to go with us? And I said, well, I need to work. And if I can be of any good to you, because they taught you then to, if you didn't know and you was willing to learn, well, they'd be willing to teach you. So when I worked for them a little over 3 years, why, I had learned to run the dozer, and I could work on the power shovel that loaded the rock down the pit. In fact, I could run the power shovel. and drill and blast, about all of it. Well, in '54 it was hot and dry, and they was going to shut down for 6 months or a year because they had a big bunch of rock piled up and road rock. And they offered to take me to Marshall to one of their quarries over there and give me a job for 40 hours a week, guarantee me 40 hours a week, just doing mechanic work. They couldn't bring me in and put me in ahead of somebody else because they had people who'd been there 12, 15 years, and that wouldn't have been fair. But I heard that over at Nokomis, there was a new quarry going in over there. So me and another guy went over there, and I told them all I could do. I could say, I can do anything you got. I could run any piece of equipment you got. I can drill, I can shoot, I can do. So they promised me a job. So I went back to the company, told them, I said, I hate to leave you, but I got it. And they said, man, if you got a chance to get in on the ground floor on a new place, just going in, and what you can do, he said, you got a whole lot better deal than we can give you, although we're not going to turn you out. Well, I appreciate that. So we moved to Nokomis, and my wife said before we left, she said, you sure this is what you want to do? And I said, Marie, all my life, I seen a little crane come along from a railroad and dig a railroad ditch stuff, and I know at that time it wasn't that big, but I thought, oh God, that's a big piece of machinery. If I could learn to run one of them. And so when I went and told these people I could do that stuff, well, they hired me. And I put in a little over 15 years for them. But they was the people that no matter what you done, you didn't do enough. I always want just a little bit more. One day I pulled into a shot down to the bottom of the hill, and I loaded the rock down the pit. 3 trucks, one on this side, one on this side. I load this one. When he went out, the 3rd truck pulled in there, and I load this one and back for it, just continues. Didn't have to stop for anything. Just everything worked good. And at noon, when I come up at noon, 5 hours later, come up at noon, well, I asked the guy on the machine, he had a counter, counted the loads we got. And I said to him, Al, how many loads we get? He said, got 90 loads in 5 hours. I said, boys, don't expect that again. That'll never happen. Well, how come? So a few days later, one of the brothers was in there, and I said to him, hey, Pete, we had a pretty good day last Tuesday. He said, what'd you do? What'd you do? I said, well, Tuesday morning we loaded 5 hours. We loaded 90 loads in 5 hours. God, he said, maybe we'll get 100 next. You know, he didn't say good job or fine. I just always wanted a little bit more. And sometimes they'd get a little rude about that. They go, oh, yeah, you ought to do this. But they didn't buy nothing but used equipment. So we had somebody else's trouble lots of times. And we had to learn to work on our own. But anyway, I spent for them, and then there's a guy coming in, taking over a little quarry. That guy had kind of lost the thing, for that part goes. He was about to lose the tax money and everything, and this guy offered to take it over, pay all of his back bills and everything, and then he'd go ahead and run it. And I went to work for him. It was Norman Lelsher from Verdon, and never worked harder 12 years in my life, but never enjoyed it anymore, because you never done anything that he didn't appreciate or he'd done. And I was his right-hand man. And excuse me, and he had an office here in Springfield, had help up here. And then he had a trucking outfit, 29 tractor and trailer trucks. And there they, I think we had 40 some employees altogether. And I done the thinking for most of them because of the production. And my theory was if anything happened on the job, I had to answer for it. I had to be there. And I always prided myself to be work on time and the last man to leave. And I put in another 12 years for him, and then he sold out to Material Service, which is owned by General Dynamics, and then they bought him out. Well, when they bought him out, they bought me with him. And I'd kind of developed a little bit of a heart problem. And then they figured out it was easier to turn me out to pasture than it was to keep me. So they turned me out. So I've been retired since 84, probably. I retired at the age of about 60. And it's been good to me, though. But they was good to me because they told me, they said, we'll keep you in our insurance. And they paid 80% of everything, medication and everything. Me and the wife both. And said, you go home. When you get your first disability check, you let us know. I went over and told the wife what they wanted to do, and she, oh, yeah, we get it. No. If these 5 cards is all we got dealt in life, let's play with what we got. Let's don't get carried away. You know, and we had the boys raised, and we gave them both a good college education, and they wanted it. And I said, you know, if we could do that, that'll mean more to them than all the money in the world we could leave them. Because if they don't know how to manage it, they could be gone in the middle of it. Well, the oldest boy, he ended up, was drafted. And he now lives in Wichita. Seattle up before. Wichita. And he does mediation for the state of Kansas. And I was telling the great-grandchildren something about education one day, and I said, get all the education you can get. He said, yeah, Dad, you used to tell us that all the time. And he said, I never knowed what you was talking about. But he said, I do now. Our other boy ended up to be a school teacher. He taught here at Morrisonville. But he had a colon cancer, and it took his life. He was gone. And he left a daughter, and she's got 2 daughters. And that's all the family got. But in the service, I drove in supply, and I went a lot of different places, a lot of different drugs and stuff we had to have. Well, they didn't have the radios and the phones and stuff to get to call this and call that. One particular time when they come up with the idea they wanted a drug of some kind, penicillin was new, and we didn't have no way of storing it to really keep it very long, and we couldn't get a very big quantity of it at a time. So it wasn't nothing for us to have a big truck, a tandem, and wheels and everything, send it to go get a little box of penicillin, but that was transportation we had. So one time, me and a supply sergeant, they gave us a requisition for some special drug and sent us to this town, and they said, don't come back without it. Go get this drug. Well, we drove all day, and we got pulled in the edge of town. It was about, I don't know, it wasn't sundown yet, but it's getting close. MP standing on the corner directing traffic, and pulled up, and I asked him about where this depot was. Well, he wasn't for sure. But he said last he knew it was over on Gibbison Street, somewhere on the west side of town. I said, okay. Next day we started to pull away, and he said, you boys wouldn't buy some good champagne, would you? And I said, how much? He said, $2. Yeah. So he went over to the weeds and brought us back. And this sergeant said to me, you buying champagne off an MP? I said, if he can sell it, I can buy it. So we stuck underneath the seat. Anyway, we went back over there. No depot. They had moved out and had moved to the South Pacific. So this sergeant, he's a good guy, but he wasn't much for planning and thinking. And he said, Oh, what am I going to do now? I said, I don't know what you're going to do, but I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull under a street light with this truck, and we're going to sleep in the back of this truck tonight, because if we'd started on home, we'd end up in an area where we'd had to drive blackout. And it ain't no hurry, we got no hurry to get back. We'll sleep in the back of the truck tomorrow. And then we'll go on in tomorrow and tell them what the deal was. Well, we got in and told them, well, okay, best you can do, you know. And, but a lot of times, but the day the war was over, we had all these trucks. I think we had something like 49 2.5 ton trucks beside the Jeeps and weapons carrier. And we was under Patton's command. Patton knew it. And when we was just sitting someplace, well, he detailed a bunch of them trucks. And one time when he had the Germans pretty well on the run with tanks, he was running out of fuel. And the Germans was running out of fuel. And so he detailed our trucks to go to the dump and get fuel for him. Well, the fuel was always in 5-gallon cans. They didn't have big tanks of fuel, because if some of them got a fire or got or blowed up, well, you know, we made. And then everybody could handle fuel then. Well, we took some racks and built underneath on the side of underneath the bed where we had some extra tanks. So our trucks went. I didn't get on that detail, but they told me they got a bunch of fuel. Caught up with Patton. And he took every can of fuel they had, even the ones they had underneath for themselves. They didn't have enough in their own tanks to get the trucks all back to our area. Of course, he got his tanks and he got stuff, and he went on. Well, they said, what are we going to do? Well, this truck had so much gas, this truck another has. So they went and drained the gas out of some of the other trucks and put it in 2 of the trucks, enough to get them back to the depot. They went back, and then they got fuel and took back and got our other trucks back. And we'd rations and stuff like that. They would just take a road and string them all along the road and send them out there. And because they didn't want anything in a big pile in case a German bomb hit it or something, it'd lose. This way they just maybe a little part of it. And they got in hauling rations, and we got rations. We got a ration and a half for every man on in our battalion, plus what patients we might have in the hospitals. After we was into Germany, or into France a little ways, they figured that the Germans wouldn't use gas, so they broke the companies down and made convalescent hospitals out of them. And they'd be in various places, and us in headquarters were supposed to keep them supplied. That was our job, to keep supplies coming to them.
When you talk about rations, what was ration? What
Food.
and what did each person get when they were rationed?
Well, got whatever we had. Now, if a lot of canned goods and stuff like that, we got stuff. Of course, we had cooks. We had one of the best cooks, I believe. He was of Russian descent. Clothes hung on him, sloppy, pants back down, you know, called him. Well, anyway, but he could take about anything, and we'd get fresh produce sometimes, like apples, potatoes, stuff like that. But most of our potatoes, most of our eggs, stuff like that, was all dehydrated. And each one of the cooks take that stuff and make a meal out of it, or so on, you know. And whatever our allotment was for a ration, we got a ration and a half, because we was medical, and we had patients in our units, in our hospitals and stuff. We had ward tents, and they could set them up, and we was supposed to be where we could be on the move anytime, anywhere, because they figured, you know, if the Germans did use gas, we had to get there as quick as we could. Because, you know, a stitch in time saves 9, especially in a life and people wounded and everything. Well, then, but we didn't get gas gasoline. One of our companies was pretty close to the Belgian Bulge when that happened, and they got a lot of patients from there, and a lot of them was just young guys, still wearing the same clothes they'd wore for several days, and in the cold and wet and muddy and working and fatigued and everything, and they'd get them in and get them shower, get them dry clothes. Most of them, they'd drug them or they'd sleep for about 3 days or more. And when they come back, and then they'd rehabilitate them. If they was able to go back, they went back. If they wasn't, why, they stay a little longer, or they'd send them back to a general hospital or so on and so forth. And but a lot of them, they was able to get, and some of this stuff I've got here, some of these stories they tell about how many troops or how many patients we did have. But, and of course, again, it's my job. I met a few guys. I met a guy in another, one of our boys was in a hospital for some kind of little surgery or something, and we went to visit him, and I run into a boy that was another medic, and he was a corpsman on the front line. And he was up for a medal, because if they knocked out a tank single-handed, they would get a reward for that. That's a pretty big deal. And he hadn't knocked the tank out. But due to the fact that he was a medic, he said, I may not get it, because we didn't carry arms. Didn't have any arms for a long time, and there at the very last they got us some. But we had the bands, the Red Cross bands, and due to the Geneva Convention, the Germans were supposed to recognize that, and we in turn tried to do the same thing for them. And our job was on the lines and stuff like that. We used to take care of the Americans first. Then there's any wounded Germans, we took care of them. If we had time left, the civilians, any civilians, we doctor them. I run onto a guy down in Florida that had been a corpsman on the line, and he said one time they brought him a couple little girls, and one of them was burnt real bad. He said, I didn't have a thing. All I had was shaving cream. We didn't get shaving lotion like they got today, or you shake up the can. We got it in a cream like a toothpaste. You rubbed it, made a lather, and then you put that on it. And he said, that's all I had. And he said, I covered that little girl's entire body with that shaving cream. He said when they finally got her to the doctors and everything, and said the doctor said that's the best thing he could have done, because he shut the air off from the wound. And she lived. And I met him down in Florida a few years ago. Didn't know him before, but I met him, and he was telling me. But personally, I never had to doctor any. Want to keep supplies to the people, and it wasn't my job, and that was my job. And I drove a lot and went to a lot of places.
Okay, after basic, did you go to Camp Ellis then?
Yes, ma'am.
So how long were you in Camp Ellis?
How old was I?
No, how long?
How long? I want to say we got in there about May or so, and we left the last of the year over New Year's Eve. We went to Camp Cybert from there.
Okay, can you explain what Camp Ellis in Illinois was?
Do you have one of these?
No, I do not.
This tells all the place, and it was a camp that they put together right quick in the cornfields. Brought people in. Then they brought German prisoners in, and the German prisoners done a lot of work.
So they brought German prisoners
Yeah.
to Illinois.
Oh, yes. I told one of our guys he's supposed to be a historian. And he said, well, I never heard of such a thing. I said, hey, there's a lot of things all of us hadn't heard about. But I said, and then I told him, and then I showed him that book later on.
And how many prisoners, German prisoners, were at Camp Ellis?
This book will probably tell you someplace, but I don't remember right off. There were several of them. And when they sent them back, this book tells this one guy that come back and married an American girl here, made his life here. And they pretty near all wanted to come back because they liked it here better than what they know what they're getting into when back.
So what did you do at Camp Ellis?
Well, we trained different part of us, and we formed our outfit. They brought a group in from, I want to say, 4 or 5 officers and 12 or 15 enlisted men, and they formed our outfit. They come from one of the other medical battalions, gas trade battalions. And then I worked in supply there and took care of the supply for our headquarters and the men there and stuff, the shoes and clothes and stuff they needed and so on and so forth. And I don't know how they got me wrote down as a clerk. It'd come back to bite me later on because I wasn't a clerk. I couldn't type. I would write the requisitions out in longhand and take them to my buddy. He was a company clerk, and he'd type them up for me. Well, I'd type them up and I'd take them to quartermaster, and I'd get the shoes or whatever I wanted and come back and I'd distribute them. So on and so forth. But that number stayed with me all the time, and when I got in Germany there, and then I had a growth come on my lip, and we was waiting to go to South Pacific, and we had most all of our officers was highly trained or highly skilled doctors, and they was commissioned and so on. And I went to my captain, and he wasn't. He was a regular Army man. And I said, Captain, can we get one of the doctors to cut this little place off? About like the size of a match head, clear as a crystal. Oh, he said, I don't know, Mike. So he took me to another doctor and another doctor and another doctor. And they ended up taking me to the head doctor of the European Theater while I was over there, head, neck, and throat specialist. No, he said, we won't cut that off, not like that. He said, that might be a cancer. So they ended up putting me on a hospital train and moved me back to a general hospital. And then they operated on, took it off. And when I left, my company commander gave me a letter to whoever it may concern that when I was done, they was to send me back to the outfit. Well, when they got done, I showed them that letter, and they just laughed at me. They said, that's not routine. We don't do that. You go in a replacement depot. They put me in a replacement depot. And then a field hospital picked me up out of that replacement depot because they thought I was a clerk. And I sat down and wrote my buddy in the meantime, and we was in southern France by that time, waiting to go to the South Pacific. And I wrote my buddy, and I didn't know, but they was just a few miles away from us. They had moved up out of Germany, down there too. And I told him, I said, if the old man wants me, you better make some arrangements. I said, this letter ain't getting the job done. Well, he come over to get me in this replacement depot when I was there. But I don't know, something, anyway, we didn't make connections. So he went back, and then they went through Army headquarters over there and got a requisition by name for me, in which you don't get hardly ever. And they brought that over, and by that time I'd been into this hospital unit. And they went, tried to get, no, they said we want him because he's a clerk. And I said, I ain't no clerk. Well, that's what this says. And I said, I don't care what that says. But anyway, they wouldn't turn me loose. So I didn't get back. But then the war ended. When the war ended, that changed a whole lot of everything else. And they had so many people over and so many. They was going to take part of our medical personnel over there because at that time there was quite a bit of fighting going on over there, and they was pretty highly trained in drugs and chemicals and so on, and surgery and a little bit of everything. And so I didn't get back to them. I come home. I didn't when I come home. My buddy, he'd brought some stuff home that I was supposed to get, and he went to Camp Cybert, Alabama. And when they come in, they got long leave. I think maybe what we get 2-3 months or better. Well, they had so many guys to process, they just shoved them off, sent them home, and then called them back. And at that time, when they called me back, they had lowered the point system. They lowered the point system to 50 points or 2 years in the service. Well, I had 58 points, 2.5 years in, almost. So that's when they sent me back. I was practically 2 years, 6 months, and 14 days, give or take a little bit. Back home before I was 21. So you grow up pretty fast. And and I tell everybody that during the Belgian Bulge, I was on a secret mission. Well, where was you at? Well, a couple of days before, the company commander come in and one evening said, Mike, take your truck and report to Lieutenant Smith's over at A Company. I went over to A Company and reported to Lieutenant Smith's, and he said, okay, go down to Enlisted Men's headquarters, Enlisted Men's barracks, find you a bunk and get up early in the morning. He said, you and I are going to take off in the morning. Just as break of day, so we don't have to have lights. He said, going to take off. Didn't tell me where. So I went back. Next morning, I met him in the chow hall, and they had a quick breakfast for us, me and him. We got in, took off. Said, which way? Oh, he said, we're going back. We was up in Germany, and he said, we're going back to Belgium. Said the officers hadn't had their liquor rations for the last several months. We're going back and get that. They was to get 1/5 of whiskey or 1 pint of something ever so many days. Well, they hadn't had it. So we used to go back and get it. So we drove back through Holland into Belgium and couldn't find what we wanted. Couldn't at the depots, they didn't have it. We ended up going back into Paris, France. And we got stuff loaded. And we got up the next morning, then it was, then when you went out, and if you went by another army outfit and they was having chow out there, you just get out and fell in line and go and get something. And you could always get something to eat. And you could other supply depots where you could find fuel and so on. And so we left there early that morning. We drove, and we was getting back pretty close to our area there in Maastricht, there in Holland. And headquarters was in Holland. And began to run into roadblocks. Guys out there with them big old weapons, and they'd question and answer you, you'd see if you was American. Because we had Germans that would infiltrate our lines and stuff that had American uniforms. They looked just like the rest of us, I know the MPs was talking there in Maastricht one time about how many guys they had stationed out directing traffic. And they said one guy out on one point out there, and they said, well, we ain't got nobody out there. And they said, yes, you have. They went out there, and he was a German soldier that was had a uniform on and everything. He was.
I'm sorry, can you get?
He was directing traffic. Now, how much he was learning or whether he was trying to learn, of course, 9th Army Headquarters was in Maastricht at that time. And anyway, when we got back in the headquarters, they didn't know why. They said, we said, what in the world's going on? I said, oh, you don't know? Oh, I know, we don't know nothing. We've been gone. You don't get no radio, you don't get no telephone, you don't get no newspaper. And they said, oh, the Germans are trying to break through. Well, but anyway, but I got a lot of experience in driving, a lot of experience in going. And after the war was over, they would take our company, our trucks from different places and put them together and move a company. And then they'd move another company and we could help, And I know I was on a detail and we moved a company south and back up in a little part of the mountains. That day was unloading, why? The motor officer come by he was from headquarters, and he said, Mike, he said, you get unloaded, he said, beat foot back to headquarters, he said, we may have to move any time. Okay. So I got unloaded about, I don't know, sometime after dinner, I dropped down off them mountains and hit the Autobahn. Of course there, just sailing all the way until you run into where one of them big bridges was, where it was bombed out. Then you went down around and back up on it and on again. And I just got settled down and thinking, well, I got about 3 hours here of hard driving, and I just wind up. Then I heard a siren. Well, what's the matter? Looked in the mirror and come a motorcycle MP guy. Pulled up and he said, kind of in a hurry, aren't you? And I said, yes, sir. Where you going? I said, I'm going back to headquarters. Where you been? Moved A company up in the hills. And I was told to beat foot back. Well, he said, see, they had a speed limit on the American. The American Army had a speed limit on the truck. She wasn't supposed to. It wasn't that I was on the highway, but on the truck. Well, he said, I'm going to have to give you a ticket. Well, whatever you have to do. So he started writing out. He said, what's the date? I said, Mike, I don't even know what day it is, let alone the date. We worked 7 days a week, Didn't make no difference. But I did remember it because the guns went off and they started shooting and banging and hollering going on, and everything. And woke us up that night. And, oh, the war is over, the war is over. So anyway, so he gave me a ticket. I thought, well, there goes my driver's medal. I was up for a driver's medal. You get, 6 months or so driving without an accident. Well, you get, then every 6 months afterwards, you got another bar to go with it. So anyway, so when I got back, well, I told the commander what we'd done. He said, okay. But they didn't do anything about it. What they could do and what they wasn't doing, they was finding some of the guys or giving them a little detail or something like that for disobeying rules and so on and so on. But hadn't been back from that too awful long, and I went out driving one day and got in about 3 o'clock. They called me over to the office. All the brass sitting around. Man, I mean everybody. And they said, Mike, we want you to go to A company. It's 200 miles. Be there in 5 hours. And right off, not thinking I was talking to brass, I said, you guys crazy? They said, no. Said, we think you're the only person we got that can go and get there without taking time to even read a map. Said, we've got orders here that was supposed to have left at 9 o'clock this morning. And here it is, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they're still laying here. We got to get them to headquarters, to A Company. So I said, I'll try. They said, it's all we ask. Said, and I was driving a 6x6, a 2.5 ton at that time. But they gave me the old weapons care that I drove for years, and they took the canvas cab off of it, just a windshield sticking up. It was a day looked about like this kind of a day was. So I went over and they said, go get dressed. We'll get you. Mechanics will fuel your truck up, get it all ready. And I went over to the house we was living in, and one of the guys worked in the office, never got to go anyplace. One of my buddies, he said, boy, Mike, I wish I could go with you. And I said, go ask the first sergeant. So he went and asked the first sergeant, can I go with Mike? I said, he's coming back tonight. Yeah, go ahead. Be a good trip for you. So he bailed in and we took off. We hadn't drove but about an hour, it began to rain. And we kept driving. Of course, as long as we was driving, that rain was going over us because they took the canvas cab off. And we was making pretty good time. Come down off the Autobahn, hit one of them bombed out bridges. Slipped on that mud and slipped off the ditch, got stuck. And he didn't know how to drive, but never drove. He come east, lived in one of the big cities, always rode a bus or streetcar or something. Well, I got up and I had a pair of chains and I put them, laid down in the mud and put them chains on, drove out and got back up on the highway. Took the chains off and we was off again. Got down there where I thought it was pretty close. But I told him, I said, Frank, we're not supposed to take time to even look at a map. But I'm going to do better judgment. I'm going to take time to look for sure, because if I miss it, we could drive 50 or 100 miles before we decide this is the wrong place, and then we all will be late. So we stopped and looked at the map, and yeah, I was on right. So we turned off and we went up to it. We're supposed to be there, I think 8 or 8:15. But anyway, we got there just a quarter after 9. Still a bit light yet. And so the ones in the A Company, they wanted to stay all night and go back. You know, I said, no, I told them we'd come back. Okay. So we left our orders and we took off again. Well, I found out when I hit that mud road going down, the guys had not only took the cab off, they took the front drive shaft out, so I didn't have no four-wheel drive. I just had two-wheel drive. So that's what kind of messed me up. But we pulled back up, and we pulled back out on the road. We pulled back out on, and we come to Hanover. There was railroad yards, about 6 or 8 tracks of rail, tunnel underneath the rail course, and they had a lot of cobblestone over there in them streets.
Is that Hanover, Germany?
That's still waiting. We was in Germany. And the military tires was good in the mud and off the road, but they wasn't good on cobblestone. And I went underneath that cobblestone. It was wet, and we hadn't. This was getting like 2 o'clock in the morning. And I always carried a bunch of rations behind the seat. Carried one of them old pump-up blowtorches. We could pump that sucker up and get some heat. We could heat us some water, and we could make some coffee. We could have some of that snuff in there, open up a can of Spam or whatever, you know, and find it. Make us a sandwich and get a little snack before we went on. Figured on pulling underneath there and we'd be in the dry. We do that. So I pulled in under that truck, went sideways and ways, and then just banged into the side of the wall. bounced back, and I reached over for Frank, and he wasn't sitting in the seat. I hollered, "Hey, Frank." "Yeah, where you at?" "Out here," he said. I said, "Stay right where you're at. Stay there. Don't move. No. No other trucks or nothing in sight." So I went out, and he went to get up, and he couldn't get up. So the first vehicle to come by was a couple of English soldiers, and I flagged them down. And then pretty soon here come another truck, and it was an American soldier. So I got these English soldiers to stay with Frank. I got an American soldier and rode on into Hanover. Some outfit, they could get a Hamlet's and come out and get Frank. The truck was signed to me, and I had a trip ticket with me, and I was responsible for that truck. And a lot of times, if you left it, not only will the Germans take it, but some of the Americans would take it. Well, I had to stay with that truck. So we got him loaded up, and then they sent him on to the hospital. And I stayed there till it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon the next day. And there's an officer driver went by in a Jeep. And they had by that morning, and they see me sitting there, and they come back, "Are you still here?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm still here." I said, "If I get somebody to come get this truck and put this truck in where it'd be okay, I'd go on up." And, "Well, how would you go?" I said, "Well, I'd get one of the Hank. They got trucks going up all the time. I'd hail somebody and get a ride." So they said, "Well, we can get that. We can go." So they went into their outfit and got somebody to come out of the wrecker, pick up the truck. As soon as they picked up the truck, I caught the next truck I could catch going north. We rode up to Helmstead. I got off and walked down to the area, and they were just falling in line for chow. And I fell in line, seen the motor sergeant, and I told him what had happened. I said, "Go back and get that truck." And he said, "Not tonight." He said, "If it's stayed this long, it'll stay until morning." He said, "Well, go back tomorrow and get it." Okay. So then I went over, and that time the brass had got word, well, they knew I wasn't in, and Frank wasn't there. So I told him what happened, and the captain said, "How long have you been driving, Mike?" I said, "Well, told him." No, he said, "That day." Well, I said, "I went out that morning and drove all morning, and I come back at 3 o'clock, and then I took off down to Acom." He said, "Well, we shouldn't have sent you." That's all he ever said. But the next morning he told me, he said, "You get a recon card, get it gassed up, we'll go back over to Hanover and see how Frank is." So I drove over there. Of course, I stayed with the truck, and he went inside. He come back out a little bit. Said, "How is he?" And he said, "He's on his way home." Said they done sent him to England. They'll be sending him home. Said he'll get home before we will, because he got a busted hip. Okay. So, but and going back, boy, I couldn't. I was still pretty shaky. Finally, he said to Mike, he said, "Mike, if we're going to make it in, you're going to have to get after it." So I did speed it up a little more. I did. But, and me and that boy kept track of one another up until this last Christmas. I never got a Christmas card from him. But my buddy in Ohio told me that he got a Christmas card from him. Said he generally writes a note, but this he just signed his name. And he was in a bunch of that on the East Coast there where they got all that storm and stuff, so we don't know what.
And that was Frank.
Huh?
And that's Frank?
That's Frank. Frank Prado.
So, you saw a lot of combat. Not, you weren't actually in combat, but you saw a lot of the combat areas
Yeah.
while you were in Europe.
Yeah.
And so you saw a lot of devastation. And was that pretty stressful seeing that?
How?
Was that pretty stressful seeing that?
Well, we just took it in stride. I know after we was up in Germany a while, the war was still on. We was supposed to get one bottle of Coca-Cola per man per month. Well, only one time we got a shipment of Coca-Cola. And we had moved up and we moved in a new area. And the next morning they called me in headquarters and said, Mike, we want you to take them Coke cases and the empty Coke back into Belgium. We'll give you some supply sergeant with you and you can pick up some supplies on the way back and so on. And I had a 6x6, that's dual handles on the back and 2 on the front and a Nexus spare. And we went, this guy went, we went back through Holland, back into Belgium with this depot and delivered them empty bottles. Then we started back. And when I got back, I had 5 flat tires. So on the duals, if you wasn't hauling no load until you could take that one off, just run on a single. I had them for, and the spare was flat. Of course, a lot of the buildings you went through, the towns you went through, a lot of them, there wasn't a whole roof and a whole town, all been, this looked like a tornado had hit. And then when the Americans come through, they took them tanks with dozer blades on them and just pushed the road out. And a lot of debris and stuff still on the road. And so you pick up nails and broken pieces, this, that, other. And, and I asked them when I went to leave, I said, you got a map? And they, we got one map and it stays in headquarters. You got to find your way back. I was always gifted, I thought, pretty well to keep my sense of directions. I've seen some guys that I've been in places too that, I mean, the sun come up in the wrong place and dark when it wasn't supposed to be and everything else. But anyway, so I took this guy and we took off. And I tried to remember some of the towns we went through. And there we'd have a lot of underground French people and all out kind of directing traffic and so on, and we'd stop and try to communicate with them. Maybe they didn't speak no English and I didn't speak no Dutch or whatever. And but if I could get the name of the town and they tell me and they point, give me direct. Till I got back in the area where then I knowed pretty well where it was at. Well, then I could come on back. And that ended up, I think, being a 3-day trip or more. But
Were each of the vehicles supplied with compasses? Or did you have a compass?
no. Stars. And a lot of nights we'd have to drive and we'd drive blackout. And you'd drive on roads where ammunition dump was. It would be along the side of the road. And we'd drive on through. We kind of avoided driving through them if we didn't have to, you know, especially late at night. And all we had is them little cat eyes, they call them, that you drove back up with. But it was good to me. Good to me. I learned a lot.
How did you guys get your trucks over there? When you first went over, how did you get your trucks over there?
Well, we didn't have any when we first went over. They was in a supply in England. We went over there as personnel. And there, they get some of the English houses and some of the big buildings, and they'd put up an office, or they'd put in some of the houses Why, the people would take the furniture out and they'd put bunks in there, and we'd have just double-decker bunks, and we'd have bunks in there, maybe be all the way from 4 to 9 guys to different houses. But this one area down here where they have for the mess hall, and we walked to there, and then uptown they had some offices, and we had offices up there.
Did you fly over? Did you go on a ship?
On a ship.
So it was a Navy ship that you went on?
It was, yeah.
Mhm.
Some of this stuff tells what ship we was on. My buddy in headquarters, after it was over with, he lived up here at Delavan. And I was talking to him one day, and we started having our Army reunions. He never got to go, but he told me, he said, Mike, I got a list of all the morning reports I made out. And you come up, he said, I'll give you a copy. Well, my wife and I drove up there. He had been on maneuvers. He stayed in the service, or he stayed in the Illinois Guard after he got down there. He spent 19 months in Korea. But he was back, and he was out on maneuvers, and he took a heart attack. And by being on maneuvers and stuff, well, then they was taking care of him. And we got up there, and he looked so bad, and boy, he just couldn't hardly go. And we left, and we come on home. And my wife said, you didn't get what you come after. I said, I didn't have nerve enough to ask the boy to exert himself any more than he was. He's not doing too good. This, and I don't know, look through the front of it all the way through. And if you would want to copy that, that would be all right with me.
Okay, thank you. Huh. So this is actually, so you went on the SS Santa Maria. Wow. And you departed from Boston, Massachusetts.
Camp Gilmer. We got to see the Statue of Liberty disappear in the fog. Just way to going out, you know, you just kept.
This is very interesting. Yes, I would like to make a copy of it. So it sounds like you got along quite well with all your officers and your fellow soldiers. You had a camaraderie that was unbelievable.
Well, at one time I had a little run-in, but with the motor sergeant, and he was a great big guy, looked like a gorilla. When you'd see him in the shower, his back turned to you, you'd pretty near think he was. He had a short neck and kind of a big head. He come from the east, New York someplace, I think. He's very bullish-like. And I didn't find out till later, he was in charge of the motor pool of the whole battalion. That he'd catch some of the drivers out away from the area and he'd thrash them. And, you know, they was all about afraid of him. And he was a full master sergeant. We stayed in Holland. No. We was in Belgium, south of Liège. A lot of them flying bombs was going by. In fact, I think they had one set for our area. But anyway, this sergeant, We was standing there in the mud waiting for breakfast. They had a 5-gallon bucket there with hot soapy water in it. You dipped your mess kit in it, jumping down. Then you took it over into clear water and dipped it over it, slung it dry a little bit. Went and got your meal, and then you got done, you come back, the same routine, you clean your mess. We're standing there, he come over and picked up a wooden mallet that we drive the tent stakes with. Coming through and pecked the guys on the helmet. Not real hard, but enough to be annoying, and they'd get out of the line. He come to me and he pecked me on the head. And I said, Sarge, don't mess around. Because if you do, somebody's going to get hurt. About that time, he looked at me and hit me just a little harder. I took that basket right across his face, just like that. He stepped back and I said, I told you. And the other guys was kind of looking, you know, because I was about the first guy that had really crossed him. I went over to wash my mess kit again, and I stooped over to wash my mess kit. The boys said, I didn't know that he come over and pull me up like that and then took open hand and slapped me right square in the face. And I went back and my head hit the corner of a table. And I went out like a light. But about the time he hit me, well, the first sergeant walked out of the command post and he seen it. He told him, get over to your barracks. He started talking to him and the sergeant said, no, you're going to go. So I sent him over there. And the guys helped me walk across over into the area where our bunks was. We were sleeping in big wall tents, laid me down, and Captain come over and he was looking at me. And the first thing I thought when I come to that I had overslept. I started raising up, get out of there. No, stay down there, stay down there. Laid there and pretty soon it began to come around. And Lieutenant Sullivan he was then. He said, let's go see Captain Pollux, see if he got any loose teeth. And right off I said, who in the hell's Captain Pollux? Still didn't know, realize what was going on. And and he said, oh, then I recognized. I went over and we went to see Captain Pollux. He checked me over and said, well, you don't have any loose teeth. I think you'll be all right, so on. And just stay in for the day, don't get out, trap around. So I stayed in my bunk that day. The next day, well, I went over to command post. Company commander was in there. Well, he said, Mike said, these things happen. He said, you just ought to go over and apologize to him and tell him you're sorry. I said, I ain't sorry for nothing. No, he said, I know you ain't. I know it wasn't your fault. He said, no, the whole story. But he said, we can't do anything about it because he come with the academy when they come here the first time with the other commanding officer and the battalion commander. And he said, if we start this through the chain of communications, it's got to go up through them and they'll knock it down. And he said, if we can smooth this over, he said, let's just kick it under the rug. I said, well, okay. I said, go ahead and report to Sergeant Cox. That was the guy. Sergeant Cox was a battalion supply officer, or non-com. So I went over the tent where the non-coms was, and there wasn't nobody there but this big guy sitting there by himself. And I walked in, I looked around, and I started to walk back out. I thought, no. If we're going to carry it on right now, let's go with it now. If we don't, well, let's. So I went in, walked up to him. Sarge, I'm sorry. I got a little carried away. Man, he like tore my arm off, shaking my arm. Just take a look at that. And he said he told some of the other guys later on, he said, one of the nicest guys in the outfit, I had to pick on him. why couldn't I picked on somebody else? But that stopped it. Then on, he didn't pick on nobody else. And, and it didn't hurt me. We got along. We got along. And from then on, then later on, after come time to, this supply officer I was driving this 3/4 ton. He would sometimes sleep half the morning or more, and then he'd want to go to one of the companies, and he'd want to wait till night before he'd come back and have to drive. And I'd have to drive, and he'd sit there, sleep, and I'd drive blackout, drive him back, get him back. And I just kind of wanted to get away. And one of the boys, I don't know what happened. Anyway, they was opening for one of the big trucks, and I wanted one of them. So I went to the commander and asked him. Well, I had to go back to and I had to see this sergeant was in charge of the motor pool, and I asked him, yeah, I was okay with him. On down the line. And then I finally got transferred into the big trucks in Oregon. And I got away from this guy where I had to just kind of bring him in at night or whatever. But that's the only trouble I ever had. I wasn't penalized for anything, and my record's clean. I didn't. I learned pretty early to not volunteer for anything, just take it as they come.
How did you get your equipment, and how did you get from England to France?
Well, our equipment was all loaded on a Liberty ship with a tank battalion and a whole bunch of other stuff. And now we had 59 trucks besides the weapons and carriers and jeeps and recon cars. They put all of that on a Liberty ship plus a tank battalion and so on. And that was a pretty good sized boat. And they told us, don't go down below because we're going across this channel. If we would hit a mine down here, wherever that mine's hit, that part will be automatically closed off. And if you're down there, you'll be with it. So we got to going over. And like anything else, you're sitting around up on deck or waiting to things to happen. And we was already anchored for that part goes, but we hadn't unloaded yet. The boys was talking, boy, they'd sure like to have something to drink. Well, I said, I know where about a half a can of ethyl alcohol is. And it's not sealed, it's open. Oh, and I said, you don't either. I said, oh, yes, I do. It's on my truck. Where's your truck? Down there. No, you don't have. So to prove to him, I went down there. And you know where I found that truck? Right in the nose of that ship up here. Right up in the very nose of that ship. I took a canteen and about with a little bit of light, not much. I poured out a little ethyl alcohol in that canteen. Put that in my canteen carrier and back up the ladder. And just as I walked up on top of the deck, there was still one of our officers. He said, where you been, Mike? I said, oh, I went down and checked on our truck. He said, everything all right? Yeah, I said, it's in good shape. Whew. Then later on, and then when it come time to take them trucks off, they had a big rope ladder, more like a big rope net towed over the side. And they'd run them LSTs up along the side. And they'd take the big winches, pick them up tanks or big trucks or what, one at a time, switch them over, put them on that LST. When he got loaded, he went in, another would come in. And it was really rough, really rough. I tell you, that water was rough. And them great big nylon ropes like that, they tied them LSTs to that ship. And a time or two it broke loose. And they told us drivers that when you see your truck go over, you go down and you get on there, because you're with your vehicle. for sure to take it off. Well, pretty soon I seen mine go over. And that thing was bouncing around, you know, bumping up against the ship and everything. And I heard that officer that was running the LST, he says, "This so-and-so breaks loose one more time, I'm going to the beach and I'm not coming back today." Well, he hadn't much more than said that, and a big old wave come by and she popped that rope, and he just fired them motors up, stuck that front end up in the air, and there I sat on the front end. He going up and down like that. And they didn't go right up to the beach. They had a pontoon bridge running out in the water, and they run up to that and dropped it out. And that way they didn't have to fight the shallow water, so he dropped the front end of that, and he had it off. They dropped it off, and I said, "Boy, sure glad to hit some solid land." And they said, wait a minute. They said, "When you go off, we got a couple of trailers here that's got them roller conveyors on them, stacked on. Can you pull 2 of them?" I said, "You tie them on and I'll burn the wheels off this or get it up if I can." So they got them on, and because they had them ahead of some other trucks, they had to get them out of there. And my truck was the only one on this side. So they got lined up, and we got lined up, and I took them. And they told me, they said, "Now when you hit that beach, don't slow down. Because you hit that sand, you know, get stuck and go slow." So I went right on up the top. I got up the top. There's some MPs up there, and I told them, I said, "I got 2 trailers here, don't belong to me. Where do they go?" And they said, "Up here, so off the right, there's a big field there. Just pull out in there and unhitch it." Said they'll find them. Okay, so I took them, left them. But I tell you, every time that sucker went up and down and going in, I had that dark brown bitter taste in my mouth, you know. Pretty sick. And then when we come home, I come home on a troop ship. I come out of Marseille, France. We was going through the Rock of Gibraltar. And of course the war was over, and they had lights and everything, and some of the guys said, "Let's go down and take a nap." So when they go through the rock tonight, we can be awake, we can come up here and see the lights and everything. Okay. We went down and took a nap. I was supposed to take a nap. Rallied up a little bit, and I felt that. And we thought we wasn't going to leave till about dark. But I felt that thing rolling. So I get up, went up on top. We was out there in the Mediterranean Sea, and it was plenty rough. I got sick. I headed to the latrine, and one of my buddies, as I went in, he had his pants down, just getting ready to sit on the stool. All the other stools and all the troughs and everything was full, guys. They even in there, you know. And as I hit that door, he seen me, and he just flew out, and I flew in. He told me, he said, "I thought I needed to go till I seen you." And he said, "When I seen you, I know you needed it worse than I did." Oh, but I finally go. But we had some of them boys that got so sick and stayed sick, putting it all the way across coming home. They'd get water and they'd get soda crackers. They'd get down the middle of the ship where it wasn't supposed to be quite as rough, you know, but them poor guys, boy, they look beat up. They'd try to stuff them crackers in their mouth, them soda crackers, and eat them and drink that water and get something down, they don't. But I finally got over part of it. Yeah.
Did you keep a personal diary or anything?
No, I didn't. I guess I should have, but I didn't. I just that's something.
Can you tell me about staying in touch with your family? Was that difficult?
Just writing.
Just writing. Was it difficult because you moved a lot? And was it difficult?
Well, you didn't get mail all the time.
Uh-huh.
They'd be maybe 2 or 3 months
Uh-huh.
before you get the mail to catch up with you. They sent it to the APO, that's the Army Post Office,
Mm-hmm.
in Carrier Company, and course, some of my job was a lot of times going getting mail. I would take the mail sergeant over to pick up the mail for the battalion. They would take it back, and then he'd break it down in the companies, and they'd get it out to them.
Mm-hmm.
And this one time when I got away from my outfit, when I got in that replacement depot, they was 2 months or better before I got any mail. And and it'd come to my old outfit. Well, they just kept it. And then they come over one time, well, they brought a big batch of mail. And my wife was pretty good about writing. She might write me 5 or 6 big pages on both sides, and end up hadn't told me a darn thing. She could make the story go, you know, and this, but she had a little more smarts than I did. She graduated from high school, but I never went to high school because as soon as I got out of grade school, I went to work with my dad, and we worked side by side right on for about 2 years, and then the Army was getting me. And when I come home, I thought about going to a trade school and learn to be a mechanic, do some mechanics, because I kind of liked machinery and stuff like that. And I guess everybody kind of wanted me to, but nobody told me I couldn't. So therefore I didn't. So I just kept putting it off. And of course, we was married and trying to find a place to live and trying to get things going while I didn't.
Did you do you have a story about dive bombing planes? Can you tell me about dive bombing planes? Did you ever do that? Or did planes dive bomb you?
We had flying bombs. See, the Germans had made them flying bombs, and they was fixed and loaded in such a way that the power and they was going, when they run out of power, those they'd turn and come down. We was standing in one Thanksgiving in Belgium in the mud, and we'd hear one. They was about the size of a Piper Cub, small plane. We'd hear one. We'd be out there looking, where's that sucker at? Because as long as it's going, you didn't have to worry. And we didn't realize that 3 or 4 miles down the road, it was coming our direction, and it was losing altitude. And it caught in some trees before it got to us, and it blowed up. Or we'd have had that for dinner Thanksgiving, I think, because our trees was in the next area. But shortly after we left, someone tells, we had a flying bomb that landed in right where C Company's headquarters was, and we was all in a pretty close area where the concussion, you know, had been so great. It would have, but we had done pulled out and left.
When did you get married? Did you get married on a leave before you went over?
I went to service.
Mm-hmm.
Had 14 days. We got married, spent 7 days together. Then I went to Europe.
So you were newlywed over there. Oh my goodness. Oh, very nice. So the two of you got married, did you have a big wedding, or did you just, and she stayed here after you got married?
She stayed here.
And did you have your first child after you got out of the service?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had. So she stayed home with her family and helped a little bit, and then she worked out a little bit for some of the ladies doing housekeeping, and she'd scrub floors and polish them for 25 cents a floor. And as I say, then the money that she got from our allowance was she took and put it in the bank. And it was all there when I come home. And with what muster and outpaying I got, we had all close to $2,000, which was a lot of money, we thought. And it did last a while, but things wasn't working for in the trucking business and expense and this, that, and the other. And then, of course, it wasn't long until we got the boy on the way. We had him named before he ever got here. I had a friend in the service, Jimmy Van Winkle, Jimmy. So we named our Jimmy, our first son Jimmy Eugene. And it wasn't long, I don't know how it happened, but then we come up with another one about 13 months later, 14. So we raised 2 boys. And I always knowed if I could get them an education, get them to go to school, if they could go someplace. I didn't have and I knew if I'd been in the service, if I'd had an education, well, then I could have got a better job maybe or something, or maybe it took me no telling where or what. But I did know that an education was important. And I kept telling the boys and the oldest boy, he wanted to go to college. And the younger boy wasn't sure. He wanted to be a mechanic. Because I built him his first go-kart. He was racing go-karts and run with factory people before he was old enough to get his driver's license. Wheels and grease. They mowed lawns in town. And they asked me, about if they could mow. Well, some of the people up there asked me if my boys would mow. So they took my mower and they went up and they mowed a few. Before the season was over, well, they had my mower wore out. So I went and bought another mower to put on. And the next year I told them, I said, boys, if this is what you're going to do, you're going to have more money. Well, then people won't pay it. And I said, oh, yes, they will. Or we won't. I said, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go buy you boys a brand new lawnmower. Take it up there, you're going to charge $2.50 for mowing for each yard. And you boys, what do we do with the money? You guys divide it. I'll buy the oil and I'll buy the gas. But I don't want to come home and say, boys, my yard needs mowed. You got my mower here, you got your mower. I said, you get up there. So I went up, and each one of these old people, most of them widow women, told them, I said, well, we want your boys to mow because they do a better job. And I said, well, this is what we're doing. I'm buying.
It's okay, it's okay.
About to blow up. Said, I'm buying them a mower. And they're going to pay me $1 each time on the mower till it's paid for. And when it's paid for, then they can divide the money themselves. One will be mowing and the other will be trimming or resting them all. And if they get behind, they can come and get my mower and kind of get caught up. But they're going to pay for this new mower that way. They all said, we want them, we want them, we want them. So they mowed and done that. When the oldest boy went to college and the other boy was there by himself, he mowed. He would go up and mow and come back and take his lawnmower, take the water hose and wash it off and take car wax and wax his mower. Every time he went up, well, you'd think he had a brand new mower. But that's the way he took care of his equipment. And I furnished the oil and the gas, and they done that. We just lived about hardly half a quarter from the edge of the little town. And they didn't have to push the mower up there. Their mother would put the mower in the car, and they'd take it up there, and they'd go up and mow. And
You were telling me that your name really is Harry E. Michael, but you go by Jack. And your dad gave you that name. But you said during the interview that they called you Michael or Mike.
well, everybody in the service went with our last name.
Okay. Okay. But then you were telling me that they had a nickname for you?
Well, that was a group of guys, 5 or 6 or 7 of us, I think, all of it. Kind of that we got to kind of get together, and mostly in Holland. We was stationed in a big schoolhouse building there, and they was on every block. They had a little what they call a cafe. Well, they didn't have anything to sell because the Germans went through. They took everything, but we'd go down there. They had a jukebox, and they had a lady in there, a young girl in there. She was in her 30s. She was older than we were. And the family was, Ma and Pa was in their 60s pretty well. And we'd go down there and write letters because it was nice and quiet. And, you know, we could put a little money in the jukebox and so on. And so with this group, I don't know just exactly how I got the name Hoot, but anyway, got that from someplace. And my buddy from Ohio, his name was Stanley Camp. We called him George. And my buddy up at Delavan, we called him the Judge. And, you know, just a little nickname like that. But
Did you carry anything for special luck?
I got a New Testament, little Bible with a steel front on it, that Marie got for me after we got married. I carried that in my shirt pocket, and I wore out how many shirts with that, wearing that.
And you still have it to this day?
Oh yeah, I still got them.
So you went to Europe with that in
Yeah.
your pocket?
Went to Europe,
Mhm.
carried it all through Europe, and every time I changed clothes, I put that on.
Is there any food that you can't eat now because of the rations that you had? Is there anything any kind of food that you don't eat now because of
No,
what you had in the service?
I eat anything that's edible. And I used to could take any drug that didn't make no what it was. But the last few years I got to where codeine, I can't take codeine. And there for a while I went by, you know, I didn't bother me. And here a while back, the doctor had the pharmacist mix up some cough medicine and had codeine in it. And when he gave it to me, he said, "This got some codeine in it." And I said, "Well, I'll try it." But I couldn't handle it. Made me squirrely.
Do you, when you were traveling through Europe and you were going to different places, did you ever come upon any concentration camps?
Our company was sent to one of the concentration camps that they had liberated. I can't tell you which one it is. It may, in some of this stuff that the officers wrote up, might. There they sent some of our medical people there and our technicians to give these people shots or doctor them or so on and so forth. And I didn't go. That wasn't part of my detail. But one of the guys, one of the other companies, he was the guy that got our group together when we was meeting afterwards, and he'd always want to get up and talk about things, and when he got to that, why, he'd just break down and cry. And he'd get up there and he'd start talking. He'd say, boys, I can't help it. But I'm going to try to get by without crying this time. Well, he wouldn't. We come to Springfield. They had a meeting here. And he got up and he was part of the ceremony and stuff. He was talking and he was crying, and they had two boys and a girl out there holding the colors. And he just kept talking, and that girl just simply passed out standing there. She just, and of course when he did, well, that stopped everything then. Well, they was good enough to him. They didn't come and shut him down, you know. But
So you were in Panama Canal also.
huh?
You went to Panama Canal?
No.
Okay. Okay, it says unit prepared for debarkation to Pacific Theater Unit. When Japan surrendered. Okay.
Let's see. Unit prepared for debarkation to the Pacific Theater. Unit was in the Panama Canal when Japanese surrendered. No. No. Let's see. Oh, they was in Europe and we was in Europe when the Japanese surrendered. I don't know how they got that in there.
Okay. Okay.
But
So, how many medical gas treatment groups were there? Do you remember?
the whole United States Army, there was 5 medical gas treatment battalions.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was one in North Africa. There was one in the South Pacific. And we was the 3rd one going, and we was the last to get started going to Europe. And 2 more that stayed in the States. They never got out of the States. Or they thought they didn't need them or what, but when they had us going over there, because D-Day, we was halfway across the ocean. That was 6th day of June. We was halfway across the ocean. And when we heard it on the radios that they had invaded France and everything, and they said, well, we might as well turn around and go back. It'll be over before we get there. Of course, that was big talk. But we got there, why? And then we went in England, and we gathered up our supplies and stuff and got all of our tents and our medical supplies and our surgical equipment and everything for the hospitals and everything they needed and so on and so forth. Because we could set them wall tents up, and they was almost like a full hospital. And then we got out of there, and we went on, and then we landed at Normandy, I think. And then we followed Patton's army up through there, staying pretty close. And several times we was in the combat zone because they wanted to keep us close in case. Well, then when they finally decided that Germans wasn't going to use gas, well, then that's when they started putting the companies here, and they'd be several miles apart. And
What was your, okay, just a moment here. Okay, can you, as a medical gas treatment battalion, and there only being 5, was there a reason why there were 5 of these units, and was there a special purpose for these units?
Well, the purpose of the units, they thought that the Germans might use gas like they did in World War II or World War One. So they was being prepared. And I understand by reading, I didn't know at the time, by reading some of these books and stuff, that some of our officers and our personnel that come from the other one and put ours together, that we got more ready and more developed and ready, and with the training we got, Camp Ellis and so on, they figured we was top notch. So they pushed us in there.
Okay, so the training that you received at Camp Ellis was specialized training
Yeah.
for the gas, medical gas treatment battalion
For a lot of stuff.
for a lot of stuff.
Now me, I working in supply, I took a course in packing and crating and shipping stuff by rail. So if we had to go rail, well, I'd be the one that would know what to do or know how to do it or how to manage that and so on.
Okay, what kind of gas were you being trained for? Or if the Germans were going to use a gas, what kind of gas were they?
Well, it was mustard gas they'd used before,
Okay.
and that's what they was thinking. Now the Americans took some gas over there,
Okay, and what kind of gas did they take over?
mustard.
So were you prepared to be able to use that gas?
We wasn't prepared to use it. We was prepared to doctor the people. Now what they did do when we was at Camp Seibert, Alabama, they took some of our personnel and took them to Florida, and they went through some swamps down there and stuff where they put out mustard gas. And some of the guys got burnt, some I guess, but they took animals with them, dogs and cats and stuff like that. And they used it for an excuse that they checking the clothing and see what clothing they had, if the proper clothing they was wearing or so on. And I forget how long, but anyway, but then they come back to our outfit and they were just off on training.
Were you trained more as a medic?
The only medic training I got was in basic. After I got in the outfit, I didn't get trained in anything.
Were you wanting to be more of a medic when you first joined?
I wasn't wanting nothing. I just took whatever. And when we, like when we got out of induction camp up at, where was it? But anyway, they just lined us up and caught off so many in the roster here and sent them one way and so many the other way. And me and a buddy, well, a kid I knew from down home, I knew who he was and knew of him, but didn't personally know him. His name was McDonald and mine was Michael, and of course we was right close on the roster. They come down to him and cut off, and I went one way and he went the other way, and he went to he went to North Africa with very little basic training at all, and was in fighting there in North Africa. And then he went on across into Italy, and he stayed away. And I was over and back home before he got home. He never got his leave, never got nothing to get home. And I spent 9 months no. Spent 13 weeks. I spent 9 months in the state of Illinois. But 13 weeks I spent at Camp Grant, taking a basic up there and getting toughened into it and going so on.
So the war came to an end when you were just discharged, and you fulfilled your military time, and you came home through the Mediterranean. Where did you land when you came back to the United States? Do you remember?
somewhere on the East Coast. I can't remember what. These here might tell you.
How did you get home?
Well, most of us rode the train, come into camp, and then when they got our discharge and everything, after we had been home, well, after we come home, first time, we got out of Rockford, we got a train into Chicago. And in Chicago, we got a train going south. Supposed to be 11:55 on the CNEI supposed to leave Chicago. And at that time, me and one of my buddies, we was over on the other side of Chicago, partying a little bit. I looked at my watch and I said, oh my God. And he said, well, come on, I'll get you. So he ran out and stopped the cab driver. Told him, said, get this man over to Dearborn Station. And, told him to give a big line. He's been overseas and he's got a big family and he's not been home and all this time. And that cabbie said, yes, sir, yes, sir. So he loaded me in there and we went over and I run down to get my bag and I run out there and I said, where's that 11:55 to CNEI in Salem? And that guy said, see them two little damn lights, tail lights? And I said, yeah. And he said, that's it. I said, when's the next one? He said, tomorrow morning at 11:55. Okay. Well, at that time, they still didn't have all the radio stuff and everything clocked, the trains and everything run on time. So I went back out and called in the cab and I said, this guy said, where do you want to go? I said, Elmer's Cocktail Lounge. He said, where's that at? And I said, I don't know. He said, I know of one. I said, let's go see if that's it. He pulled up and sure enough, it was it. And found my buddy there, And he was from, I think, Detroit, Michigan.
So you got home. Did your wife know you were coming home?
Well, they told us when we hit the East Coast that call your dad, don't call your mother. Because they'd had too many, excuse me, did I get out? They had too many people that call their mothers and they'd, be in shock or said, don't call your mother, said, call your dad. So when I got the East Coast, I called my wife. And of course, the little town I called through, well, they had a little switchboard and the gal was on it. Of course, everybody knows everybody for miles around. And she knew I was calling, and of course, she plugged me into the line, on their line. And it was a party line, of course. And we was talking, and my mother happened to be in town. Well, they was staying there in town, I guess, part of the time. She was walking on the street, and down below, she hollered down and told her, said, Jack's on the phone talking to Marie. So she went up there, and they had that phone out there. Then they switched over, and I talked to Mom a little bit there, And then Marie and I made plans to. So when I got up to Grant, was being discharged, why I got a train into Chicago, and then I got a train coming down to Decatur, and I had her to catch a bus. She rode a bus and got up to Decatur and met me in Decatur. We stayed, I don't know, 2 or 3 days. And then I called my buddy up in Delavan, his mother. I knew her, I'd met her. And she said, well, he's home. Said he's been to Alabama. And the girl that he rode to all the time from Alabama, he went down there and just married her and brought her back. He said, they're here. So I said, okay, Bray and I's coming up. So we got the bus, we drove up there to Delavan. And we spent a few days with him and her and so on. Then we rode the bus on back down to pretty close to home. And then my folks met us there and where we was going through on the bus and took us on home.
So, you seem to have made a lot of friends in the service and you had quite a few relationships with these people, and you stayed in contact with them. Did you attend reunions?
Huh?
Did you attend reunions?
Just most of our Army reunions, some of them afterwards. Because for a while I was working and I couldn't get the time off to go. Some guy couldn't, we hadn't. But when we was in Holland, this place where we went down there and write letters, I told you about the older people there. Marie and I got a chance to go back. We went back, and this guy that put our trip together was just a lad whenever we was in England. And later him and his brother took over the agency. I guess his dad had was a travel agency. And I guess his dad was drank pretty heavy or something. Anyway, what? But he didn't last too long, and these boys run this travel agency. So the guy that's put our group together, well, I knew this, got a hold of him, and they got a bunch of us guys that wanted to go, and at one time several of them made up their mind they was going to go. Well, when we decided to go, Marie and I went to New York, and we met him and his wife and a couple of other guys and their wives. But it ended up there's 5 of us guys and our wives went back. And this guy that put our trip together, he said it was 40 years, so the anniversary, see. So he said it's prohibited to almost go to the big places, like the beach and everything else, because he said, then people don't know you're coming, and they've got the price jacked up about 3 times normal, and, you know. So he routed us to take different routes. So we traveled a lot of backroads country that we hadn't traveled 40 years prior to that. And anyway, we got into Holland, but we flew from JFK in New York, we flew to Brussels, Belgium. And when I retired from my company, I retired a little bit before that, they bought me a camera outfit. So I got off, was going to take a picture of that airplane. I couldn't get far enough away from that airplane to get it in the picture. God, that looked so big, it scared me on my. How'd they get that big sucker off the ground, all those people in it? But anyway, we flew out, it was at night. Of course, time we got over there, why, them being ahead of us anyway, why, anyway, we unloaded, and they told us that we go to hotel rooms and had that fixed up first. We went there, and then somebody said, well, we got a bus coming tonight to pick us up. We're supposed to go to somebody's house. Well, coming to the house we went to, this lady's folks owned one of them big monasteries. And some of our officers had stayed there, and she heard the 95th was coming. So she come down and she standing out there in the crowd with a 95th sign holding up, you know. And we seen that, and we went to that. And she was the gal that this guy that put it together had communicated with a little bit. And so they was going to take us someplace for, we didn't know what, but we went to their house. And while we was there, some of the guys said, what are we here for? And I said, I don't know, we're just supposed to come here. Well, there's 5 of us guys, their wives, plus an extra gal went along with one of them. Pretty soon, civilians started showing up. And between all of us a little bit, we could figure out the language. And look, they would happen to be these guys that had been in the French underground. They had been fighting the Germans also, and they come, and so she got the same amount of people there to come, and we sat around and talked and so on. And of course, when you go there, why, everybody drinks, not to get up bent out of shape, but sociable. So they said, the lady come around and asked them what they wanted. So this one lady that the guy that put the show together, why, they said what she wants. She said, well, she'd take orange juice and vodka. And asked Marie, and Marie said she'd take the same thing. And I thought, whew, this ain't gonna work, because she never drank alcohol. So when she come to me, well, I said, orange juice. She said, no liquor? No, no liquor. So after she got away, I told Marie, I said, I'll trade you when you come. I might be able to handle what you got, but I don't think you will. I don't want you to get all bent out of shape. Oh, she felt so bad. I said, that's okay, it's okay. Well, when they come, we changed. But we'd sit there, maybe an hour or so and talk and visit these people, and pretty soon, well, the meal's ready. Well, went in, and she'd had some kind of barbecue chicken and vegetables and stuff all set out there, and like smorgasbord, and we went and helped herself and sat and talked till way hours in the night. And then they couldn't get a bus to take us back, but they got some of the individuals with their cars, and their cars wasn't big enough, so they could only handle 3 people at the most. So we bunched up in little cars and finally got back to our room. And Marie and I took a shower that night, kind of washed up a little bit. Still the jet lag was getting to us. We went to bed. Oh, we passed out. Woke up the next morning. We had 20 minutes by the time we woke up to get dressed and get on the bus for a trip to tour part of Belgium. We made it, but we didn't have no breakfast. I didn't think Marie could ever get dressed in 20 minutes, but she did that time. And she most Johnny, I mean, she come from a big family, and she was the oldest in the family, and she would go to the field with her dad and work with the horses and stuff, and she never learned how to cook. She didn't know where you put the meat on first, potatoes on first, or when or how or something. So, but anyway, and when she dressed, she sewed her own dress and made her own stuff. When I'd go to pick her up, well, she'd be late getting ready, and her dad would just, I didn't know at the time, but he was just very unhappy because she was making me wait. But when she did, she come out, she looked like a queen. She was ready. And she was, first night I walked her home was the 6th day of June. And she remembered that more than she did her anniversaries or anything else at all. And I've got some poetry there at home. I didn't bring it. You see it? That she wrote on the 6th day of June. That was the first night I walked her home. The church, local church, little country church. Kids, young people meet there, and one night a week, and we'd have a little church service, sing a little song and so on. And we had a chaperone or two who'd come with, or the minister. And then we'd play games, and then we'd go home. And most of us walked. They walked from that way, this way, that way. And one night there's some boys come from another area, and they had a car, and they drove in there. And Maria had never went with anybody. No, she wasn't. And so the boys in the car got ready to go and said, come on, Jill, let's go. No, he said, I ain't going to go home. He said, I'm going to walk Marie home. Well, I know Marie didn't want that. And I spoke up. I said, no, you ain't, I am. Oh, well, okay, he said. So he went out. So I walked her home. About a half mile down, then I come back. I drove the truck over to work, old church. And my brother went with me. And got home, my dad was a big tease, and he said, my brother younger, how come you guys stayed out so late? Well, Jack had to walk some girl home. Well, so when she got home, then her two sisters, younger, she teasing her because she had a boyfriend. You know, she said, told me that she sat out on the front porch the next day and cried, trying to figure out some way to tell me not to come back. But it didn't work. I come back anyway. But yeah,
I see that you have a hat for a veterans organization. What organization is that?
that's American Legion.
And how long have you been a member?
A little over 20 years. I was, I guess I worked a long time. I didn't have time to go to meetings. And after so long a time, then I joined the Legion from up here at Bloomington in the state. And they sent my name to the Legion Hall down there and said, you got, you know, guys. And it happened to be one of the fellows that was working where I worked. And he told me, he said, hey, he said, you belong to Legion? Yeah. Why don't you come in and join our group there, you know? And I said, well, you know. So I thought about it. And the dues was a little cheaper. So I went in and joined. And it went on a while. And, after, I don't know. But I'd say the last 12, 15 years or more. Maybe longer than that. One of the guys that was chaplain took another job, or another post. And they asked me if I would be their chaplain. Well, to be honest about it, I felt honored. And to be a chaplain and serve in Legion, you don't have to be a ordained minister or something. But they ask you to be kind of a godly person and care about somebody else, and you know, the care you can do. And so I took it on. And it has been good to me. There they give you a chaplain handbook. And it's got prayer for everything, and that's permissible for you to read the prayer off. And to me, I can't read somebody else's prayer. I can, but you know, I can sketch through it and get the idea, and I can put it together up here. And so I've been doing that for some time, but this last year or two, I've had pneumonia, and it's kind of took a back set on me, and I got slower, and of course it got a little more demanding. Besides it, and when I first took over chaplain work, when they have the burials and stuff, and they'd go out and have the honor guard and all, why? They'd take the chaplain out there, but he wouldn't do nothing. They didn't have nothing for him to do. So one day I said something to the commander. I said, don't the chaplain have something to do with this? Well, no, he said, so far we hadn't, you know, whatever. So I was looking through a bunch of chaplain handbooks, and I found a piece in there that's written, supposed to be read after you give the people the flag. And I showed that to the lady that was a administrator at the nursing home, and her husband had been killed in the service, and his body sent home without a military funeral. And she read that, and she said, you know, that might be what they said it was my husband, but she said when he was buried, she said, I wasn't thinking nothing. You know, all mixed up and everything, but she said that. So I told her I want to take the card that we present to the people and type that on the back of the card. And she said, I'll do that for you here. So at the nursing home, she took it, and they set up their computer So it's their computer. And I can take cards, 50 or 75 or so to them, and they'll start running through it. And when I give them one, this is all written on there. I don't have that. But it's something like this banner of Lamb now folded is the Lebanon Memorial of the Courageous Thoughts of the Comrade, the one that we came here to honor this day. White stripes tells of the sky and overlooks the eternal, like God the eternal, so on. And the red stripes tells about blood, sweat, and tears have been conquered by our comrade. For the devotion of his, something about for his country or something. And the white stripes, no, the blue stripes represents the sky. And something else about what he done to help the wars and make peace with future generations. It says something about this is his flag. This is our spiritual heritage. You receive it with tears of our mind and faith of our hearts. Post 94, amen. And I've had different people, and when I do it, 9 times out of 10, whoever gets the flag gets the lady. She's sitting down. Whoever folds the flag, they bring over and present her. Then I come in and I kneel on one knee, lay my hand on the flag, and I got this stuck in my pocket. I flip it out, and I just sketch through it and read it off to her, you know. And when I get up, I salute the flag and leave. And different people said, everything works fine, but that little bit of personal touch that you give it at the tail end, what makes it all come together. So, but since I've been kind of under the weather and not as stable as I was, why, I asked him, I said, boys, you're going to have to get me some help. You're going to get somebody. So they have got another man that fills in when I'm not there. And of course, the Legion tells you, anytime you have anything, you have a prayer to start with and you have a prayer to finish with. Well, they don't always do that, but so our commander now, he told me, if this other boy comes, well, he said, you close or you'll start and he'll close. That's fine with me. Now he don't use the prayer book. He's gifted enough and all, I guess he is, but I use it to some extent. Kind of like to stay within the language they like to use. And I had one party here a while back come to me, and I can't remember who he was. But he asked me where I got them prayers, and I told him, well, on the prayer book. And he said, well, he'd like to have a copy of some of them. He said, of course, one of their chapters or something, anyway, he said, they don't do that, he said. And I said, well, come over sometime and we'll make you some copies or whatever. But he never has showed up. But you don't know in life who you meet or what goes on. You touch some and you lose some. And of course, since my wife spent nine years in the nursing home, paralyzed on the right side and couldn't talk. Needless to say, I was there a lot of times. And of course, I got acquainted with a lot of them people. I seen them people come in for Sunday service. Nobody show up. They wouldn't have nobody show up. So I kind of volunteered a little bit. They've got me not every month, but pretty near every other month. And so they call me and I go do service for them. And I do a little different type of service than some of them do. I'm a firm believer that you should read the Bible and you should but how much of it do we read that we understand? And I took a speech class after I was working. My son was teaching over at Pana, and they was having adult class at night class. And they had a guy, he'd take a speech class. So I went and took a speech class. And I learned there right away that to get to whoever you're talking to, you got to get on their level. You got to get on their level. And for years I had a slide presentation I done of the quarry, the way we produce limestone. 100 colored slides. Go set that up and run that. And then I'd narrate it each time. And different people told me, so why do you do that? Why don't you just put that on the tape and just punch it in and sit back and let it go? You can't do that. Today I'm talking to school kids, little kids maybe. The next day it may be high school kids. The next time it may be people that owns machinery or a machinery place, or another customer, or farmers or so on. You've got to get on their level, use the kind of language that goes with what they do to make it work. And I learned that pretty quick. So that's why I do a little different service with them. Not a very good singer, can't hardly keep a tune in a basket for that part goes, but I try to mix it up a little bit, use some of the old songs. And in our speech class, this guy told us to use something for a demonstration. Like in a speech class, we were supposed to give a speech to inform. I give a speech on how to pertain a patent, because I patented a piece for the quarries. Different people told me that won't work. You can't do that. Well, maybe you can. So I had a lady that took care of the car insurance for me and the boys and everything. And I was saying something to them one day, and she said, "Well, Jack, if you want to do that, I'll type your letters up for you." Good. Now Marie could type, but she couldn't type for me, because I'd tell her something, and she said, "No, that's not the correct way to do it. It's me talking." So I just write out the letter and take it to this lady, and she'd type it up, and she'd had experience in that. And we got a hold of a patent attorney in Washington. I sent the stuff to him. Gone a while. Pretty soon got a letter back. It'd been denied. Well, I talked to another guy. It was an old salesman that come from St. Louis up to our quarry, and I was telling him about it. He said, "You know what I'd do?" He said, "I'd go out there and talk to that man." I said, "Man, he speaks a different language than I speak." He said, No. You go talk to him, he talks like we do. But all this other patent lingo he puts in on this, he said, that's the way it is. So I'll do that. So I made arrangements for a couple of days off, and my wife and my daughter-in-law took me to the airport in St. Louis, and I got on a plane that morning, flew out there, and went to his office. We talked about an hour or so, and the only thing he had in common with what I was doing, he had took a pickup truck and went to a gravel pit and got a little gravel for his driveway. And he showed what I told him, what I had done. And he said, "How many 1,000 tons of material have you run over this here since you've had this operation?" And I said, "Probably 1,000,000 tons. He said, "I'll get it for you." He said, "This goes before the judges." And he said, "Some of the senior judges and the junior judges, some that don't know, if they get a hold of it, they don't really know what you're talking about." But he said, I do. Now he said, if you want to go back over this, take another, I don't know, $300-400. And he said, I will see that it gets to a senior judge, and if it don't go through that time, I'll go back and talk to him personally. But he said, I know what you're trying to do. What I'd done, the vibrating screen that they grade the rock with, if they have to change screens or change grades of rock, they got to take them screens out, put the others in, whatever proper. Normally, we would run with an 1.25 on top, a 3/8, ½ inch in the middle, and then 1/8 of an inch on the bottom. You still follow me? Well, through that inch screen and 3/4 there down to a ½ inch, that all went out in one pile. And then from the ½ inch on down to the 1/8 inch down here, that went into like the chips for the road oil, and everything through the 1/8 of an inch went down for limestone at the bottom, and all right down the bottom of the bed. Well, I went down to the end of the here, cut this off, put a flop gate in there. Designed a lever, a lock going on. Normally to change them screen, it'd take 4 men an hour to take them out. But it'd take 2 hours to put them back. That's 12 man hours. I cut that down to less than 20 minutes by just shutting the machine down and flopping them gates up. And one day, there's a guy there from the company that sold us the equipment, and he should have known, because I was making grades where I was separating all the grades. And the boss told me, he said he wanted me to make a grade where blended everything 3/8 down together. They called it a 3B, B for base rock. And so I said, well, okay. But he knowed then I had to be down for a while to do all that screen changing. But some other little something happened to the machine that the boys had to work on. So I sent somebody up there, I said, go up there, that 1.25 on the top, put a 3-inch screen in that, and open them gates up. And I'll come on down through it down there. And him and this guy in the machinery kept walking down there at the plant, looking at the plant. And the boss said, oh, you making that 3B already? Yep. Then he seen what he'd done, but this guy didn't catch the drift. That weighs down only just a few minutes. Made a big difference. But I never got anything out of it. 2 or 3 companies, you know, this, that, the other. But the thing of it was, they was selling everything they could make like that, and they don't venture out. So but I did hold the patent for the time it was done. And this guy, patent attorney told me, he said, now when this come through, he said, before we file it, in the Patent Gazette, it's filed every month in the Patent Gazette, before we file it, we're going to file it in Canada. We don't have to produce it in Canada, but we get it on file, then they can't take it away from us. But he said, so anyway, that's about the biggest thing that happened there, I guess.
So,
Well,
has anyone ever thanked you for serving your country?
One time I was in service here a while back. Some of us guys went, you know, we had our uniforms on, and we stopped in a little restaurant somewhere. Some young man came over and thanked us. And when we come home, there wasn't no hooray, big party and everything else or so on. We just come home and fell in line. And I had the hardest time when I come home, because all my life, somebody had told me what to do. when I got out of school, I worked with my dad, and of course he called the shots. We worked, and I went to service. They put there told you every time you take a drink of water. And when I come home, I was dumped out there. What was I going to do? And it was a while before I got my bearings kind of together. I guess maybe one thing, Marie said something one time and kind of, well, she didn't mean it that way, but I took it that way, that I wasn't working. So that's why I took some of that money and went and bought a truck. And, well, I can do that. So I started. And, but anyway, and I'm not sorry for what we done or what we had to do. And my theory was then, I was a young guy. No dependence, nobody. Only working, helping my folks. And I was along with my dad. They told me afterwards, you know, if I would have put in, that I'd been working that much with my dad, why, they might have got them some allotment or something, but no, they'll make it. But well, you got something there you want to talk about?
When you were in Europe, did you buy or trade things for things in Europe?
Well, first time I went to France, in Paris, it was wide open. I bought Chanel No. 5 perfume, $2, little bottle. I sent that to Marie, and boy, I mean, we still got the box today. Oh.
Did you trade for things when you were, did you trade for things?
I know what you're getting to. Some of the boys come home, they brought guns, knives, so on, war material, so on, souvenir.
So someone drew this.
An artist. He's got his signature down there in the corner, date, and everything else.
March 3rd, 1945. Wow. So, how did you get this?
Well, we was living in this little town of Shenapgool in Holland,
Mm-hmm.
and in this big schoolhouse. And the word got out, there's a guy that was an artist. Go ahead and roll that up if you want to and look at it.
Oh my gosh.
And that he would make a portrait of you, you know, or so on. And so I made an appointment to go down there. And he and his wife. And I posed for this. He had a eraser and a feather, a piece of charcoal, and a little short lead pencil about so long in the paper. I sat here and he sat over there. And he had me to just look off this one direction. And about 20 minutes went by and he said, okay, we'll take a break. I looked, I thought he was done. No, he said, got more. 2 hours. And he came up with this. This is a copy of it. I just made it run off a copy machine.
That's just fantastic. Huh.
And I give him, he didn't want money. because he couldn't buy anything, he didn't have anything to sell anyway. So I think I gave him something like 3 or 4 packages of cigarettes, a cigar, and had some little chocolate bars. That's so big. And I think I gave him 2 or 3 chocolate bars and a pack of gum for his wife. Of course, American cigarettes, they thought they was something. And that's what I traded, and I got the biggest thing that I brought home that means a lot to me. I mean, you know, the way I got it, and the way I got it home. And after I got it home, you can imagine me taking that out, living in a duffel bag. What am I going to do with it? How am I going to get that home? All my life I've been learned to improvise, or if you didn't have, you made do with what you had or whatever. And I can remember during the Depression when they just thought, well, not that much around, but we got by. We made it. So I thought, you know, so I went to the mess hall, got some boards out of the mess hall. Put these on here to strengthen it because it's pretty flimsy otherwise. Put Marie's address and everything on here and so on, and had it censored. This is the guy's. This is the postage stamps. Cost me. I wonder how far that would get today in the post office.
I don't think it would.
They wouldn't even let you in the door with it.
No.
So I didn't have anything to lose. I said, yo, I ain't got nothing to lose. So we sent her off. There, that's what. Oh.
So this is a letter from Marie.
Yeah, on the 6th of June. I didn't realize I put it in there.
Oh, and this is from June 6th. 3 years ago, you brought her home.
3 years ago this very night, from League, you brought me home.
This is the poem.
Yeah. That's her handwriting. I tried different times to get her to publish it in the paper when they come out once in a while, you know, they're asking for people with poetry, but she never would.
Do you want to read it?
Huh?
Do you want to read it?
Yeah, if you want to. Oh, you want me to read it? Of course, she smeared a lot of stuff there on the front, you know, said, dearly beloved husband, Jack. To my loving husband, 3 years ago this very night, from League you brought me home. I was just a kid, a good boy's pal, a quiet girl all alone. She was. Though most I liked, I loved them none, until you came along. Though my love for you was slow to wake, yet soon it grows so strong. You loved me first so patiently, almost as of afar. Though in most things, your daily life, I was your guiding star. Ere from the first, unconsciously, I strove hard to please you. That more worthy of you I might be, and loving me for you.
That is beautiful.
is.
That is special.
I didn't realize I had it in here.
How long were you married?
65 years.
That's wonderful.
The last 9 years, she spent in a nursing home, paralyzed on the right side and couldn't talk. And I was there. And I guess the odd part about that part, she couldn't talk. But the nursing home never knew how much I could get out of what she could tell me. We could communicate. She developed a set of hand signals that I had to decipher. And of course, her eyes. First thing she come up with, her socks. You want them bigger. I bought men's socks, I bought this socks, and I bought that socks. Then it dawned on me what she was trying to tell me. Those socks that were the tops, like the diabetic people wear, so, you know. And when I took them to her, she, and her good signals like that, she'd take that fist like that. Because this hand she couldn't use. And sometimes she'd come up with something. Boy, I'd leave at night with tears in my eyes, trying to think, you know, what in the world? But somewhere at home, oh, that's what she's talking about. And I'd go back and I'd tell her. And we talked about someday we'd do something to our little house where if something happened to one of us, we could take care of the other there at home. Well, it never got done. And so I went ahead then, and we had money in savings and so on, and she had some money from her folks' estate, so on. And so when she went down, my son come home from Kansas, and he told me, he said, "Dad, what are you going to do about your house?" And I said, "Oh, I can live in this house the rest of my time." "No," he said, "you can't do that. If you're going to do it, you're going to have to do it now." Well, I said, "I want to see them built. I don't want somebody to tell me the salesman talk and show me pictures of this, that. I want to see it." So he'd come home and he'd drive all Friday night and get there Saturday, and we'd go Saturday to different places where they built the modular homes. And I had a guy come in at the Traco and took our house down and set this on our other basement because the water, sewer, and air all come in out of the basement. So I set this right on top of that basement. A little bigger, of course, one out here for blocks. I went in one day at the nursing home, and Marie was sitting there, 2 or 3 other ladies, old ladies, they sitting there, and she was sitting there, her head down. Went over and I got her chair and I pulled her over in the corner, and I said, "Marie, all of her life you had to get her attention and you had to stay with her. If you didn't, she'd try to outthink you, or she'd get, you know, maybe this won't work." So I pulled her over and I said, "Marie, I want to tell you something. Now look at me right here. Concentrate real hard. Do you remember when we talked about getting our house down and getting a house where we could take care of one another?" She said, "Yeah." She remembered. I said, "I got one coming." She said, and I said, "Now don't get excited. Don't get excited. It's not here yet, but it's a coming." I couldn't tell her. I had mine down. We had ours down and everything. We moved everything out of my shop. And I lived in our Airstream trailer. We had an Airstream trailer, and I lived in it, what we had planned to do to all of it. And I said, "It's a coming. But when I get it here and get it set up, if there's any way on God's green earth I can take you home, I'm going to take you home." From that day on, she never fretted about being in there. Somewhere in it, she knew. So when they got it done, I walked over and I told the doctor. He said, "You're going to need a lot of stuff." I said, "No." Gonna need a bed, a Hoyer lift, commode, electric bed, commode. And he said, I can get it all for you, but the Hoyer lift, I don't think I can get that. And I said, well, I think I can. Because I done talked to a lady down in Burden, American Medical Supplies, and she told me she could get anything I wanted. Medicare would pay rent on it for up to a certain length of time. Then if I didn't need it, well, I turned it back. And other than that, well, after this certain length of time, it was automatically mine. So he said, what do you need? And I said, she tells me all I need is like a prescription for you, the list of what I need. He gave it to me and I went down there and she said, I'll get that stuff brought out to your house and set up. And I went in and told the nursing home, I said, come to get her. And the gal that was running the nursing home then called all of the staff in. I didn't know at the time, but I knew they was working on something. She said, you talked that man out of it. He can't do this. So they talked and talked and talked. And I said, and the doctor knew I couldn't, but he didn't tell me I couldn't. But he let me try. So I took her home, kept her for 5 months through the cold winter. And anyway, but then I couldn't keep going because I started losing weight and she couldn't talk, but she could still make some signs and stuff. I know one night I told her I got a shop and I got antique cars.
Okay.
I told her, I said, Maria, I'm going out to shop. Because it's cold weather. We had the Airstream trailer in there. In cold weather, well, I'd turn the furnace on, let it burn through the day, and then shut it off at night. And I went out and I come in, and she looked back over her shoulder like that, motion up towards the lip. Oh, I said, the phone rang while I was out. She said, yeah. Well, I got an answering service, so I went and answered. But little things like that, and different people said, well, get her a bell, let her ring that bell. I said, no, you're running crazy. I said, get her to talk, get her to force herself to make a sound. The one word she said, after I had her there, and we got the new house in, and I brought her home, I pushed her over at the exact window, or the door on the kitchen, and they had some lumber laying out there. And she could see it was a little ways down there. She, no, I said, we're not going to go out there. We're going to build a deck. Oh, and I pulled her away from there. And her head snapped. She seen them lumber. And she said, boards? And I said, well, that's lumber, honey. We're going to build a deck out here like we had on the other house. She said. So I got a guy to help me build it. We built a deck out there. And I could take her out there on the deck in the summertime and sit there and the neighbor boys had a biplane, they'd fly over and she could see them, and that was height to her glory. You know, we sat out on that deck. And but then when she started going down, or I started going down, I know it wasn't important where they found me or not. Out in the yard, maybe I'd passed out or something, but I'd left her in the house, either in bed or in the chair, and she couldn't communicate. She couldn't get nothing. So I got to send her back. So I called the doctor and called the nursing home. And I went and sat on her bed and I told her, and we had a little girl that was working with us part of the time. She wanted 6 hours a day, 6 days a week at $6 an hour. Well, I was paying her. But she didn't always work 6 days a week. You never know what day she was going to take off or what day she wasn't going to be there. And every time I'd plan something, well, that'd be she couldn't be there. So one day, I think, January, 10th of January, cold, oh, it was cold. Phone rang early that morning. Picked it up. This little girl's mother said, well, Tia's not be in today. Very rude of me, but I didn't say a thing. I didn't do nothing, just laid the phone down. I just fell apart. I thought, so I called my son out in Kansas, and I said, son, what are we going to do? Well, now, Dad, we need to get that room fixed down in the basement. And he went through old rigmarole stuff. When he stopped to get his breath, I said, wait a minute. We don't have time. Do whatever you have to do, he said. So we sent her back to nurse. And she spent, like I say, 9 years there. I was in and out. But we got to work. I could tell her things. And I could get her reactions and all that. Lots she understood. And some of her reactions, I could tell that when things wasn't going right. And I didn't go to some of the help. I went to management and talked. But made a better life for both of us. But I want to say 4 years, Mother's Day. They called me at 6 o'clock in the morning. Said she's gone. Thank God she don't have to suffer no more. So since then, got adopted Zeta to help us. She comes 2 or 3 days out of the week, or sometimes all week, and we do this or do that. And if we decide to go work on the cars, we go work on the cars. That's the first picture there when I brought her home.
Oh my gosh.
Now flip it over to the back pictures. On the back, very back.
Oh my.
That's what it looked like when it finished. Now the one back of it there, the sedan, that's coupe there at the bottom. The sedan there, that's another car I've got. All my life I wanted to do a coupe like I want to do it. That's not like Henry done it, or the wheels and so on, but I wanted to change it, and that's what I wanted. Nobody home but me. So set out, and I done most all that work in my shop, except paint it. I took it to a paint shop. I took the motor stuff and had the machine work done on it, and then I took it to my shop, put it all together. Since then, I've met a lady at the nursing home. She was a good resident and helped take care of my wife a lot, because Marie, she sat here and this lady sat over here, and she could understand what she needed more. And in the nursing homes, that even the nurses and the staff, they changed so often, and a lot of the CNAs and everything, they couldn't figure what she wanted. And this lady could, and she'd tell them. And she was rather heavy, took oxygen, bad diabetic, weighed about 250 some odd pounds. And, but she knew, and she'd tell them, and, you know, and if she would get pneumonia or something, she did occasionally, well, they'd have to take her to the hospital. Go in, Marie's face would be about this long. And as soon as they said, well, Mary's back, well, you know, meant a lot to her. So then after Marie left, well, this lady called me in her room one day and she said, I want to go for a car ride. I wasn't sure I could even get her in the car. So I said, well, where do you want to go? I want to go to your house and see where you and Marie lived. And I said, well, I'll go see what I can do. I knew about it. So I went and asked the nurses. They said, well, we have to call her daughter. Her daughter's her power of attorney. We have to get permission from her before we can let her out here, because she wouldn't go anyplace. Her daughters are coming to get her, and she wouldn't go. This is my home. This is where I'm going to stay. So they said, so they called her daughter. She was in the state of Washington. She had a cell phone, of course. Found them suckers will find you, you know. And she got it and realized it from the nursing home. She said, "Oh my God, what's Mom done now?" He said, "Mom hasn't done anything. We want to know." Of course, in a deal like that, you get acquainted with the other people too. And of course, the daughter. He said, "We want to know if it's okay with your mom. Take a ride with Jack someplace." "Lord, yes," she said. "If he don't mind hauling her," said, "if he can get her, go out and get her going." Because she wouldn't go no place. So they got a couple of CNAs, and she got her walk. She walked with a walker, and her had a little oxygen run along behind her, and tube, and up. So she knew that she went over to my house, and she'd heard us talk about you pulling the garage, step off on this lift, take it up the next level. So he stepped over, had her wheelchair, got in there and took her up the next lift, took her in. Just had her walker, she could walk around, had her oxygen, kept her in. Oh, I don't know, we stayed a couple hours or more, I guess maybe. Finally, I told her, I said, "Well, Mary, I got to get you back. Of course, it's going to be supper time for dinner." She said, "I ain't going back. You're going to fix supper here for me." I said, "Mary, you're a diabetic." Well, I knew a little bit about what can I fix. Well, we come up with some, I fixed some stuff. We had supper. Then I took her back. And she liked that so well. And a time or two I was going to Walmart or something. Well, I'd go pick her up and she could walk with her walker and take her. Wasn't long till she called the dietitian in one day and she said, "I want to diet. I want to lose some of this weight. And that oxygen, I don't need that no more." And she'd slept with oxygen for 4 years. Took that away from her. She started losing weight and she started walking. If she couldn't walk out in the courtyard, she'd walk up and down the hall. She lost over 50 pounds. Got down less than 200. Now she's back over 200 a little bit now, but she got down. No oxygen. And I said to her, "Mary, what in the world turned you around?" "Well," she said, "you just give me incentive to stick around a little bit longer." I said, "Well, hang on, let's go." So we go to live, and then we got other couples. And of course, we belong to this Model A club, and sometimes I take her over there when she feels like it when she goes. And her family's, they've adopted me. Because her daughter's already told her, one daughter said, "We've been there the last 2 or 3 Easters. You and Jack come to my house for Easter." The other daughter, we've been there at Christmas time, and she's planning the old one. But if it's good for her, I guess it's good for me. Gives us something to think about. I do get bored quite a bit just sitting at home looking at the 4 walls. But I look back and count my blessings as to what I've got and where I've been. And I couldn't have raised, or we couldn't have, of course, 2 better boys, I don't think. Youngest boy, of course, I told you he died with cancer, but he was a school teacher. And he taught them all the theory that when they say you can't do something, he said, the bumblebee's not supposed to fly either, but he does. There ain't no word as can't. You can do it. And he'd used a lot of examples, and I guess he kept his class interested. And of course the other boy, Jim, he tried a couple of marriages or so, and they went sour on him. But I'm not all saying it's their fault either. He's not the easiest to get along with. But he probably got part of that from me as well as his mother. But he lives out there in Wichita, and he does, like I say, he does mediation. Told me, he said, "Sometime, Dad," he said, "boy, you get some dandies." But he said, the biggest part of the thing, you get people that don't think. They think it all supposed to go one way. He said there are two sides to every story. And when you get them in here and you go over them and then they go back and he worked for the Conservation Department out in the state of Washington for 10 years. And they wanted him to, and he told me then, he said, I can see where somebody ought to be interested in doing some of this work. He said, but I can't start something else because with this would be, and he got 2 or 3 cash awards from Washington. He said, now when you get cash money, he said, they'll give you a certificate. This, that, and the other, a lot of writing on them. But when you get the actual money, he said, you got to be doing something pretty good or they wouldn't pay you. But then they wanted him to move on the eastern side of Washington. Well, he didn't want to. Well, he'd met this young lady out there. She come out there though, some people. They had a wedding. She come out as a friend. And Jim went as a friend of some of the other at the same wedding, and that's where they met, dancing. And he always called her a dancing partner. Well, then she worked for the airlines, Delta. She was in charge of the pilots. When they send them pilots all over the world, she's got to get them back, or she got to make for there, and she got to get them back and get them on this flight or that flight. And while she was with this company, why they hired a new executive of some kind in the company, and they said to him, they giving him all the phone numbers, and they gave him her personal phone number. He said, I don't need that. They said, yes, you do. He said, you're going to get someplace, she can get you home. You may think she can't, but she can. So him and his family went to Las Vegas, I believe it was. And anyway, they had some weather and rain, storms, and so on. And they needed a car to get to where they was going to fly back or something. Anyway, he couldn't get a car rented. He couldn't get nothing. He couldn't get no plane. He couldn't get no tickets. So he called Patricia. He said, I'm in Vegas. I'm there and like to heal. She said, where you at? Give me your phone number. Stay with that phone. Stay with that phone. Give me 20 minutes. She called him back and she told him to go down to this other street down there, another hotel down there. There's a car down there with your name on it. And Jim said, how in the world do you do? Well, she said, we got ways of knowing. But she said it's just like rental stuff. They've got them there. If you call them companies, she happened to call one of the companies, have you got a car in Vegas? Yeah, we got one. You want it out? Yeah, they're wanting it. Because they want somebody to drive it out, so, well, sign up to this guy. But her and him finally dissolved partnerships. So that's another story.
Well, Jim, or Jack, I want to thank you for your time. I want to also thank you for your service to our country. I've enjoyed interviewing you and listening to your story.
Well, I hope I haven't bored you too much.
No, you have not. And I appreciate everything you have told me.